My billionaire CEO X adopted my son from foster care without knowing he's adopting his own biological child. I froze in the doorway of social services, my heart stopping at the sight of him. Grant Mitchell, my ex, tech billionaire, and the last person I ever expected to see here, was sitting with my caseworker, Sarah. My caseworker. For my son's case. Miss Morgan, please have a seat, Sarah called, gesturing to the chair beside Grant. Mr. Mitchell was just telling me about the wonderful nursery he's prepared. Grant didn't recognize me at first. 5 years, sobriety, and natural colored hair had changed me. But then our eyes locked, and his widened in shock. Rachel? You two know each other? Sarah asked, glancing between us. Before either of us could answer, the side door opened and Jake toddled in with his foster mom. My son. Our son. With Grant's eyes, chin, and that familiar crease between his brows when he concentrated. Jake, come meet your soon-to-be daddy, Sarah said cheerfully. The room tilted sideways as realization crashed over me. Grant Mitchell was adopting my biological child, his own son, and had no idea. Rachel? Grant's voice sounded far away. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I swallowed hard, a bitter laugh escaping. Oh, it's not me seeing ghosts, Grant. It's you, about to adopt your own flesh and blood without even knowing it. Have you ever experienced a moment so impossibly cruel that it feels like the universe is playing some cosmic joke? That's what happened when I discovered my billionaire ex-boyfriend was unwittingly adopting our biological son, a child he never knew existed, and a child I had no legal right to reclaim. If you believe in second chances, impossible coincidences, and the messy reality of redemption, hit subscribe. This story proves that sometimes life writes twists that no fiction writer would dare imagine. The silence that followed my statement was deafening. Sarah looked between us, confusion etched across her professional features. Grant's face had gone completely pale, those piercing blue eyes, Jake's eyes, fixed on me with disbelief. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately, Sarah finally suggested, her training kicking in as she recognized a situation spiraling beyond her experience. Miss Morgan, Mr. Mitchell, if you'll follow me to the conference room. Mrs. Delaney can take Jake back to the playroom. I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from Jake. My little boy, who didn't even recognize me as his mother after our limited supervised visits. He clutched his foster mother's hand, peering curiously at Grant with no idea of the bomb I just dropped. Rachel. Grant's voice was taut, with controlled emotion. Is this some kind of joke? Does it look like I'm laughing? The words came out harsher than intended. 2 years of sobriety had taught me to manage my emotions, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. Conference room. Now. Sarah led us down the sterile hallway, the fluorescent lights highlighting the vast differences between Grant and me. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his dark hair professionally styled, power and privilege evident in every confident step. I followed in my faded jeans and plain blouse, the uniform of someone who'd clawed their way back from rock bottom and still had miles to climb. Once the conference room door closed behind us, Grant turned to me, his composure cracking. What the hell are you talking about, Rachel? If this is some desperate attempt to... Mr. Mitchell, Sarah interjected firmly. Before we continue, I need to understand what's happening. Miss Morgan, are you claiming that Jake is your biological child? I nodded, swallowing against the tightness in my throat. Yes. I surrendered my parental rights when he was 6 months old. I was in no condition to be a mother then. And you're claiming that Mr. Mitchell is the biological father? Sarah's professional demeanor couldn't completely mask her shock. Yes. I faced Grant directly. Jake was born July 12th, 3 years ago. Count back 9 months, Grant. Where were we in October 5 years ago? I watched realization dawn in his eyes. The timing was undeniable. October had been our last month together before he'd ended our 3-year relationship to focus on his burgeoning career without the distraction of a serious girlfriend. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We were careful. Not that last weekend at the lake house. The memory flashed between us, almost tangible in its intensity. Remember? The condom broke. I told you I was on the pill, and I was, but I'd been sick that week, on antibiotics. I didn't know it affected the efficacy. Grant sank into a chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. And you never thought to tell me about this? About a child? My child? Anger flared hot and fast. I tried. I called you dozens of times after we broke up. Your new assistant always said you were in meetings. I emailed. I texted. I even went to your office. You had security escort me out, remember? Called me unstable and clingy. By the time I knew for sure about the pregnancy, you'd made it crystal clear you wanted nothing to do with me. Sarah cleared her throat. This is clearly a complicated situation. Mr. Mitchell, your adoption application doesn't mention any biological children. Because I didn't know, he snapped, then visibly reined himself in. I apologize, Miss Patterson. This is unexpected. Understatement of the century, I muttered. Sarah turned to me, her expression gentling. Miss Morgan, you surrendered your parental rights voluntarily after Jake's placement in foster care. The termination is legally binding. While this information about Mr. Mitchell is relevant to the adoption process, it doesn't restore your legal relationship to Jake. The clinical reminder of my greatest failure hit like a physical blow. I know that. I'm not trying to. I don't expect. The words tangled as emotions threatened to overwhelm me. 2 years of therapy had taught me to recognize when I was approaching my breaking point. I need a minute. I stepped into the hallway, pressing my forehead against the cool wall as I struggled to regulate my breathing. The universe had a sick sense of humor. After everything, the spiral into addiction after Grant left me, the overdose that sent me into premature labor, the heart-wrenching decision to surrender my parental rights when I couldn't stay clean. Now Grant Mitchell was going to raise our son. Grant, who had everything, who had left me with nothing. The door opened behind me. I expected Sarah with her clipboard and sympathetic professionalism. Instead, Grant's presence filled the space, his cologne, still the same after all these years, triggering memories I'd tried desperately to bury. Is it really true? His voice was quieter now, the initial shock giving way to something more complex. Jake is mine? I turned to face him. DNA will confirm it, but yes. Look at him, Grant. He has your eyes, your chin, that little furrow between your brows when you're thinking hard about something. He's smart too, like you. The foster mother says he can already count to 20. Something flickered across Grant's face, pride, perhaps, or wonder. But it quickly hardened into the calculating expression I remembered from our final days together, when every interaction had become a business transaction to be navigated. This changes the adoption process entirely. I'll need to consult my lawyers, have DNA testing done immediately. If he's my biological child, the legal approach shifts completely. He pulled out his phone, already typing notes. Always the CEO, always 3 steps ahead, always focused on process rather than people. Same old Grant. He's not a corporate merger, Grant. He's a little boy who's already been through too much instability. I shook my head. Do you even want to be a father? The Grant I knew was laser-focused on building his empire, not raising a family. He looked up from his phone, expression unreadable. People change, Rachel. Priorities shift. I'm not the same man you knew 5 years ago. And I'm not the same woman. I straightened, meeting his gaze steadily. I've been sober for 2 years, 3 months, and 14 days. I've rebuilt my life from nothing. I'm working as a nurse's aide while taking classes to get my RN license. I see Jake for supervised visits twice a week, and I've never missed one, not once, even though I have no legal right to him anymore. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. I didn't know you were using back then. There's a lot you didn't know. You were too busy becoming a tech wonderkind to notice I was falling apart. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. I'd thought I'd worked through this anger in therapy. Apparently not. The conference room door opened again, and Sarah rejoined us. I've spoken with my supervisor. This situation is unprecedented in my experience. Mr. Mitchell, we'll need to pause the adoption proceedings while we verify paternity and reassess. Miss Morgan, while I understand this is emotionally charged, I need to remind you that your legal standing remains unchanged regardless of Mr. Mitchell's biological connection to Jake. I understand, I said quietly. I'm not trying to disrupt Jake's life. I couldn't stand there and say nothing. Grant's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. I need to take this. It's my attorney. As he stepped away to take the call, Sarah moved closer to me. Rachel, I know how hard you've worked, how far you've come. But I need to make sure you understand that this revelation doesn't change your legal status. I know. The words tasted like ash. I gave up my rights. I can't get them back. The court prioritizes stability and Jake's best interests. Mr. Mitchell has already completed home studies, background checks, and all the necessary steps. If paternity is confirmed, it might actually expedite his case rather than complicate it. The irony was breathtaking. Grant would get yet another thing handed to him on a silver platter, while I, despite 2 years of fighting to become worthy of my son, remained legally estranged from the child I'd carried and loved and grieved. Grant returned, tucking his phone away. My attorney is arranging expedited DNA testing. We can have results within 48 hours. He turned to Sarah. I'd like to continue my scheduled visit with Jake today, if that's possible. Whatever the complications, I don't want to disrupt the relationship we've been building. Sarah nodded. I think that's appropriate. Rachel, your supervised visit is still scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Thank you. I gathered my dignity around me like armor. I should go. I have class in an hour. Grant's gaze followed me as I collected my bag. Rachel, wait. We should talk more about this, privately. Can I call you? The sheer audacity nearly made me laugh. 5 years of silence, and now he wanted my number? Sarah has my contact information. Have your people call her people. It was petty, but the flash of annoyance on his face gave me a tiny spark of satisfaction as I walked out the door. The community college classroom was half empty when I slipped into a seat at the back. Anatomy and physiology too, the final prerequisite I needed before applying to the RN program. Under normal circumstances, I love this class, the ordered logic of the human body. Systems working in beautiful coordination, healing, and adapting against all odds. Today, I couldn't focus on a single word. My notebook remained blank as the professor discussed the intricate workings of the endocrine system. Instead, my mind replayed the shock on Grant's face, the painful recognition as he really looked, at Jake for the first time and saw himself reflected there. Earth to Rachel. Tara slid into the seat beside me, her scrubs wrinkled from her shift at the hospital where we both worked. You okay? You look like someone just told you the world is ending. Tara had been my roommate for almost a year, ever since we'd met at a recovery meeting. A nurse's aide like me, but 2 years ahead in the RN program. One of the few people who knew my full story. Remember my ex, the one who doesn't know about Jake? I whispered as the professor turned to write on the whiteboard. Tech boy wonder with the ego the size of Texas. Hard to forget. She paused, noting my expression. Oh God, what happened? He's adopting Jake. The reality of the situation hit me anew with the saying of it. He walked into social services today to continue the process, having no idea that he's adopting his own biological child. Tara's jaw dropped. I don't even have words for what that is. Cosmic irony? Divine intervention? The universe's idea of a sick joke? All of the above. I slumped in my seat. He's going to get DNA tests done, but there's no doubt. Jake is his spitting image. Holy shit. Tara's whisper drew a glare from the professor. She lowered her voice further. What happens now? I don't know. His adoption might actually go faster once paternity is established. Meanwhile, I'm still just the birth mother with supervised visits twice a week and no legal rights. Tara's hand covered mine. This is a lot to process. Do you need to call Brian? Brian, my sponsor. The steady voice of reason who had guided me through the darkest days of early recovery. Already texted him. We're meeting after class. Good. She squeezed my fingers. Whatever happens, you're not alone this time. Remember that. The professor's voice cut through our whispered conversation. Miss Morgan, Miss Sullivan, perhaps you'd like to explain to the class the relationship between the hypothalamus and pituitary gland? Tara, ever the better student, launched into a perfect explanation while I tried to pull myself together. I needed to focus. My entire future, my ability to support myself, to be worthy of even the limited role I played in Jake's life, depended on completing this degree. But how could I concentrate on the hypothalamus when my entire world had just been turned upside down? Blue Mug Coffee was busy with the late afternoon crowd when I arrived to meet Brian. He'd already claimed our usual corner table, 2 steaming cups waiting. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen his share of hard times, Brian had been sober for 15 years. He talked me through countless crises, but nothing quite like this. You look like hell, he greeted me with his typical bluntness. Nice to see you too. I dropped into the chair across from him, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Thanks for meeting me on short notice. Your text was concerning. Universe imploding, need adult supervision. What's going on? I took a deep breath and recounted the day's events, seeing Grant at social services, realizing he was adopting Jake, the confrontation that followed. Brian listened without interruption, his expression shifting between shock, concern, and something close to wonder. Well, he said when I finished, that's certainly a higher power moment if I ever heard one. Of all the children in the foster care system, your ex finds your biological son. Some higher power has a twisted sense of humor. I sipped the tea he'd ordered for me, chamomile with honey, his standard prescription for emotional emergencies. What do I do now, Brian? He considered the question with the deliberate thoughtfulness I'd come to rely on. What are your options, realistically? Legally? Almost none. I terminated my parental rights. The court won't reverse that just because I've been sober for 2 years. And emotionally? I stared into my tea. I could fight it, try to block his adoption somehow, though I don't know on what grounds, or I could accept that this might actually be good for Jake. The admission felt like ripping off a bandage, painful but necessary. Grant can give him everything I can't, financial security, stability, opportunities I could never provide, and he is Jake's biological father. He has more legal right to him than anyone except me, and I signed mine away. Brian nodded. That sounds like the 12 steps talking. Acceptance of things we cannot change. But should I change this if I could? I looked up at him, searching for the wisdom he'd always provided. Jake deserves the best possible life. Is that with me, still building my recovery day by day, working for minimum wage while I struggle through school, or with Grant, who has resources and stability in spades? Those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive options. Brian's gaze was steady. The best outcome for Jake might involve both his biological parents in some capacity. The thought of co-parenting with Grant, of sharing Jake's life rather than reclaiming it entirely, hadn't fully formed until Brian voiced it. Grant would never agree to that. He doesn't share well, especially with people he considers beneath him. The Grant you knew 5 years ago, maybe. People change, Rachel. You're evidence of that. He leaned forward. 5 years ago, could anyone have predicted you'd be sober, working, in school, rebuilding your life? Give the man the same opportunity to surprise you. I wanted to believe it was possible, but the memory of Grant's coldness when he'd ended our relationship still stung. The clinical way he'd explained that I didn't fit into his 5-year plan, that our relationship had become an impediment to his optimal career trajectory. The man I'd seen today, already strategizing with his lawyers, seemed fundamentally unchanged. I need to protect myself, I said finally. And Jake, I can't go through losing him twice. Absolutely. Protect your heart and your sobriety first. All I'm suggesting is that you remain open to possibilities you haven't considered yet. Brian checked his watch. I've got to head to an evening meeting. Are you coming? I shook my head. I need some time to process. But I'll be at the regular one tomorrow. Call me if you need anything, day or night. And Rachel? His expression softened. Whatever happens, remember that your worth isn't determined by whether you regain custody of Jake. Your worth as a person, as a mother, exists independently of legal definitions. The reminder brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thanks, Brian. As he left, I remained at the table, turning my sobriety coin between my fingers, a nervous habit I developed in early recovery. The bronze disc, commemorating my 2 years clean, caught the afternoon light. On one side, the serenity prayer. On the other, to thine own self be true. What was my truth now? That I loved Jake more than anything in the world. That I'd fought my way back from the brink of destruction to be worthy of him, even knowing I might never regain legal custody. That seeing Grant again had unearthed emotions I thought I'd processed and released long ago. And the hardest truth of all, that despite everything, a tiny, irrational part of me still responded to Grant Mitchell, still remembered what it had been like to be loved by him, before ambition had consumed whatever he'd once felt for me. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls, and a text from an unknown number. This is Grant. We need to talk before your visit with Jake today. Meet me at Riverside Park, 10 a.m. The playground near the duck pond. Typical Grant, not asking, but telling. Assuming I would rearrange my schedule at his command, my finger hovered over the delete button. But this wasn't about Grant or my lingering resentment. This was about Jake. Whatever was best for him had to guide my decisions now. I texted back, "I have work until 9:30. Can meet at 10:15. The response came immediately. "Fine, 10:15. Tara was already in the kitchen when I emerged from my tiny bedroom, the smell of coffee drawing me like a beacon. Our apartment was modest by most standards, a two-bedroom in a weathered complex on the outskirts of the city, but after the halfway houses and shared recovery rooms of early sobriety, it felt like a palace to me. "Morning, sunshine," she greeted, sliding a mug across the counter. "You look marginally less shell-shocked today." Evolution, not revolution. I took a grateful sip. Grant texted, "Wants to meet before my visit with Jake." "Are you going?" "Yeah. For Jake's sake, we need to figure out how to navigate this circus." I leaned against the counter. "Any words of wisdom from someone who's not emotionally invested in this mess?" Tara considered, tapping her spoon against her mug. "Remember why you got sober in the first place. It wasn't to get Jake back. You've always been realistic about those odds. It was to become the person you wanted to be, whether or not you ever regain custody. When did you get so wise?" "I'm just parroting what you told me when I was 6 months sober and freaking out about whether my ex would let me see my kids again." She smiled, the memory of her own struggles evident in her eyes. "It worked out for me. Eventually. One day at a time, right?" "Right." I glanced at the clock. "I should get going. Breakfast shift waits for no one, especially not former addicts with complicated personal lives. Text me after you meet with Grant. I want all the juicy details about the billionaire baby daddy." I rolled my eyes, but her teasing lightened my mood as I headed out the door. The morning was crisp with early fall, leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson. As I walked to the bus stop, I tried to prepare mentally for seeing Grant again. Yesterday had been a shock, reactions running on pure adrenaline and emotion. Today, I needed to be clear-headed, rational, focused on Jake's needs rather than my own tumultuous feelings. The senior care facility where I worked part-time was only a 20-minute bus ride away. Simple work, helping residents with basic care, monitoring vital signs, assisting the nurses with daily tasks. But it had been my lifeline when I'd first gotten sober. Structure, responsibility, the satisfaction of being useful. The modest paycheck barely covered my share of rent and tuition, but the experience was invaluable for my nursing school applications. "Morning, Miss Rachel." Walter, a 92-year-old former jazz musician, waved from his favorite spot by the window. "You're looking especially pretty today." "Flattery will get you everywhere, Walter." I checked his chart, noting his medication schedule. "How's that new physical therapist treating you?" "Trying to kill me with those exercises." He winked. "But I'll outlive her just to spite her." The morning passed in the comfortable routine of care work, medications, vitals, checks, helping with breakfast, listening to stories I'd heard a dozen times, but still enjoyed. The simplicity of the tasks grounded me, reminding me how far I'd come from the days when I couldn't be trusted to care for myself, let alone others. At 9:30, I signed out and changed from my scrubs into jeans, and a simple blouse I kept in my locker. Nothing fancy, but a step up from my work clothes. I brushed my hair, applied a touch of mascara and lip gloss, not for Grant, I told myself, but because I always tried to look my best for visits with Jake. Riverside Park was a 15-minute walk from the care facility. As I approached the playground, I spotted Grant immediately, even from a distance. He stood out from the cluster of nannies and stay-at-home parents like an exotic species in a familiar habitat. Today, he wore casual clothes, designer jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but still exuded the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and closing multimillion-dollar deals. He was watching a child on the swings, not Jake, who would still be with his foster family until our afternoon visit, but a girl about the same age. Something in his expression caught me off guard. Longing, wistfulness, a softness I'd rarely seen during our relationship. He sensed my approach before I spoke, turning with that hyper-awareness that had always characterized him. "Rachel, thank you for meeting me. You didn't give me much choice." I sat on a nearby bench, maintaining a careful distance. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until after my visit with Jake?" He sat beside me, leaving appropriate space between us. "The DNA results came back this morning. Rush job, one of the benefits of owning a biotech subsidiary." His tone was matter of fact. 99.9997% probability that I'm Jake's biological father. Even though I'd known it with certainty, the scientific confirmation still hit hard. And we need to figure out how to handle this situation. For Jake's sake. What does your high-priced legal team suggest? A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. My legal team has outlined several options. I prefer to discuss them with you directly before involving more attorneys than necessary. Jake's been through enough transitions already. The consideration for Jake's well-being surprised me. I'm listening. Grant ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from someone usually so controlled. The simplest path forward is for me to continue with the adoption as a biological parent, which actually streamlines the process. In that scenario, you would maintain your current visitation schedule, potentially with reduced supervision over time if things go well. If things go well, I repeated, meaning if I stay sober, keep my life together, don't cause problems. Yes, his directness was both refreshing and painful. The second option is more complicated. We could petition for a modification of the termination order, citing changed circumstances. It's a long shot, but with my resources behind it. I stared at him, unable to process what he seemed to be suggesting. Why would you do that? Fight to restore my parental rights when you could legally have Jake all to yourself? Grant's gaze fixed on the children playing nearby. Because I've been doing a lot of thinking since yesterday about what's best for Jake. About what kind of father I want to be. He turned back to me. I never had a mother, not really. Mine died when I was 4. Too young to remember her properly. My father never remarried, hired a series of nannies instead. This was more personal history than he'd shared during our entire 3-year relationship. I'm sorry about your mother. I didn't know. I never told you. I never told anyone, really. His smile was tinged with self-awareness. I don't do vulnerability well. No kidding. That earned a genuine laugh. Fair enough. The point is, I know what it's like to grow up with a biological parent missing, even with every material advantage. I don't want that for Jake if there's an alternative. The sentiment seemed genuine, but skepticism ran deep. So what exactly are you proposing? I don't know yet. Grant's admission of uncertainty was so uncharacteristic it momentarily rendered me speechless. I'm still processing the fact that I have a son, that we have a son, that the universe arranged this cosmic coincidence where, out of all the children in foster care, I connected with my own biological child without knowing it. The universe, or your subconscious? The question slipped out before I could stop it. You must have seen something familiar in him, even if you didn't recognize it consciously. Grant considered this. Maybe. There was an immediate connection. Something about his expressions, the way he approached problems. He shook his head. It doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is what we do now. And what is that, exactly? I want to know about his birth. About what happened after we. He hesitated, searching for the right words. After you dumped me to focus on your career trajectory? The bitterness I'd thought I'd processed in therapy resurfaced with surprising intensity. Yes. He didn't try to soften it. After that, I want to understand what happened to you, to him, how he ended up in foster care. Everything I missed. The request opened a chasm of pain I typically kept carefully sealed. It's not a pretty story, Grant. I don't expect it to be. But it's our son's story, and I need to know it. His gaze was direct, unflinching. Please, Rachel. I'm trying to do the right thing here. Help me understand. I looked out at the playground, gathering my thoughts. The story of Jake's birth was entwined with the darkest period of my life, my spiral into addiction, the overdose that triggered his premature delivery, my inability to care for him in those crucial early months. Sharing it meant exposing my greatest failures, my deepest shame. But Grant was right. It was Jake's story too, and his father deserved to know it. Not here, I said finally. There's a coffee shop around the corner. More private. He nodded, following my lead as we walked silently to the Grind, a small independent cafe I frequented during lunch breaks. At this hour, it was nearly empty. We ordered black coffee for him, tea for me, and found a secluded table in the back corner. After you ended things, I began. Cupping my hands around the warm mug, I fell apart. Not right away. At first, I was angry, determined to prove I could thrive without you. I threw myself into finishing my nursing program, picked up extra shifts at the hospital where I was interning, On the surface, I was handling it. Grant nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I saw you once, about a month after. At that fundraiser for the children's hospital. You seemed fine? I was excellent at seeming fine. I took a sip of tea, buying time. Meanwhile, I wasn't sleeping, could barely eat. Started taking Ambien for the insomnia, then Adderall to function during the day. Then a colleague introduced me to Oxy after I injured my back lifting a patient. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You got hooked. It was gradual, then sudden. The way addiction usually works. By the time I discovered I was pregnant, I was already in trouble. Pills, then cheaper alternatives, when I couldn't afford my prescriptions anymore. The shame of those days still burned, despite years of therapy and 12-step work. I tried to clean up when I found out. I really did. Went to a detox program, started prenatal care. But recovery isn't linear. I relapsed at 5 months. Grant's knuckles whitened around his coffee mug, but he remained silent, letting me tell the story at my own pace. Overdosed on heroin cut with fentanyl. Some random person called 911. When I woke up in the hospital, I was in labor, 3 months early. The memory still haunted my nightmares. The beeping machines, the panic, the crushing guilt as doctors fought to save both our lives. Jake was born weighing 2 pounds, 7 ounces. They didn't think he would make it. But he did. Grant's voice was rough with emotion. He's a fighter, like his father. I smiled faintly at the acknowledgement. He spent 10 weeks in the NICU. I was in court-mandated rehab for most of that time. Child Services took custody as soon as he was stable enough to leave the hospital. I had supervised visits, started working my program, tried to get my life together enough to get him back. But I relapsed again when he was 6 months old. And that's when you surrendered your rights? I nodded, the old grief rising like a tide. It was the hardest and easiest decision I've ever made. Hardest because giving up my child felt like cutting off my own arm. Easiest because, in that moment of clarity, I knew I couldn't give him what he deserved. Stability. Safety. A parent he could count on. Grant was silent for a long moment, absorbing the story. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the judgment I'd feared. Thank you for telling me, for being honest about what happened. It's not something I'm proud of. But you got clean. You rebuilt your life. You've been showing up for supervised visits even though you have no legal obligation to do so. He studied me with those piercing blue eyes. That takes extraordinary strength, Rachel. The unexpected acknowledgement brought heat to my cheeks. I did it for him. Even knowing I might never get him back legally, I wanted to be someone he could be proud of someday, when he's old enough to understand. And now here we are. Grant leaned back in his chair, the gesture encompassing the bizarre situation we found ourselves in. By some twist of fate or cosmic coincidence, I'm about to adopt our son. If you still want to, knowing everything. Why wouldn't I? I raised an eyebrow. Some men might be hesitant to take on a child whose birth mother is a recovering addict. Addiction has genetic components. And there's always the risk I could relapse, complicate his life. Some men aren't me. The simple confidence in his statement was pure Grant. Jake is my son. Nothing about your past changes that. And your recovery is your business, impressive, but separate from my decision to be his father. The clinical division of our roles stung more than it should have. Right? Separate lives, connected only through Jake. That seems fitting. Grant checked his watch, a gesture so familiar it sent an unwelcome pang through me. You have your visit soon, right? We should head back toward the social services office. I nodded, gathering my things. As we walked side by side, I was acutely aware of the space between us, not just physical distance, but the vast gulf of experience that had transformed us both in the 5 years since our relationship ended. I'll have my attorney contact social services about the DNA results, Grant said, as we approached the intersection where we would part ways. They'll want to reassess the adoption timeline, but with biological paternity established, it should move quickly. And my visitation? I have no intention of interfering with that. Whatever our past, you're Jake's birth mother. That connection deserves respect. He hesitated. Would you be open to discussing a more flexible arrangement once the adoption is finalized? Less institutional, more natural. The offer surprised me. What did you have in mind? I'm not sure yet, but supervised visits in a sterile office seem unnecessarily restrictive. given the circumstances. Maybe we could transition to something that feels more like normal family interaction. Park outings, maybe dinner occasionally at my house. You'd trust me alone with him? Grant's gaze was steady. You've been sober for over 2 years. You're rebuilding a career in healthcare. Everything I've learned about you in the past 24 hours suggests you're not the same person you were during active addiction. So yes, gradually, I think we could move toward more normal interactions. The validation from someone who had once written me off so completely was disorienting. I'd like that. For Jake's sake. For Jake's sake, he echoed. Something flickered in his expression, a question unasked, a thought unexplored. Then, his professional mask slid back into place. I should let you get to your visit. We can talk more later. As he walked away, phone already in hand to handle whatever business empire emergencies awaited his attention, I felt oddly adrift. Yesterday, my life had a painful but predictable structure: work, school, supervised visits with the son I had no legal right to reclaim. Today, everything was in flux, possibilities opening that I'd never allowed myself to consider. The most confusing part wasn't the practical implications, but the emotional ones, particularly the unwelcome realization that seeing Grant again, witnessing the man he'd become, had unearthed feelings I'd thought long buried under the sediment of heartbreak, addiction, and recovery. Dangerous feelings that could compromise everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild. Jake was already in the visitation room when I arrived, arranging colored blocks in careful patterns on the floor. My heart swelled at the sight of him, dark hair falling across his forehead in a cowlick identical to Grant's, small face furrowed in concentration as he worked on his creation. "Hi, Jake," I said softly, kneeling beside him. "What are you building today?" He looked up, his smile cautious but genuine. "A castle for dragons. The red blocks are fire." "That's very creative. May I help?" He nodded, pushing some blue blocks toward me. "These can be the water, where the friendly dragons swim." For the next hour, we built elaborate structures, read his favorite book about a caterpillar, and colored pictures of the animals he'd seen on a recent trip to the zoo with his foster family. Throughout it all, I searched his face for signs that he recognized me as more than just a regular visitor, some instinctive awareness that I was his mother, but saw only the friendly caution he showed to all the adults who drifted through his young life. Sarah observed from her desk in the corner, taking occasional notes. Near the end of our visit, she approached with a gentle smile. "Jake, would you like to show Rachel the picture you drew in preschool yesterday? It's in your backpack." As he rummaged through his small backpack, Sarah lowered her voice. "Mr. Mitchell contacted us about the DNA results. It's unprecedented, but it actually simplifies the legal process. The adoption will likely be finalized within weeks rather than months." I nodded, unsurprised, but still feeling the impact of the news. He mentioned we might be able to adjust the visitation arrangements once everything is official. That would be his prerogative as Jake's legal father, yes. Sarah studied me with professional compassion. "How are you handling all this, Rachel?" "It's an extraordinary situation. I'm taking it one day at a time." The recovery cliché was nonetheless true. Whatever happens, I just want what's best for Jake. "Look, Rachel." Jake's excited voice interrupted as he thrust a drawing toward me. "I made a family." The crayon drawing showed 3 stick figures, a tall one labeled Dad, a small one in the middle labeled Me, and a third figure with long brown hair. No label for the third figure, but the implication was clear. "That's beautiful, Jake." I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. "Who's this?" I pointed to the unlabeled figure, heart pounding. "That's the lady who comes to see me." He pointed at me matter-of-factly. "Sarah says it's good to have lots of people who care about you." Not Mom, not yet. Maybe not ever. But still included in his concept of family, however loosely defined. It was more than I dared hope for, and less than I'd secretly dreamed. "Can I keep this?" I asked. "I'd like to put it on my refrigerator." Jake nodded solemnly, then returned to his blocks as the signal for the end of our visit sounded. I gathered my things, pressing a kiss to the top of his head, the only physical affection I allowed myself during these supervised interactions. "See you on Thursday, buddy. I can't wait to hear about your field trip to the fire station." As I walked out into the autumn afternoon, Jake's drawing carefully protected in my bag, I felt the familiar mix of gratitude and grief that accompanied every visit. Grateful for the time with my son, grieving the normal mother-child relationship we might never have. But today, there was something new in the emotional cocktail, a tentative, fragile hope that perhaps, through this bizarre twist of fate, a different kind of family might be possible. Grant's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of one of the city's most exclusive residential buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the skyline and river beyond, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across minimalist furnishings that probably cost more than most people's entire homes. "Nice place," I commented, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from my voice. "Very austere." Grant closed the door behind us. The decorator called it masculine minimalism. I call it having too much money and too little time to care about interior design. He gestured toward the sitting area. "Please, make yourself comfortable. Can I get you something to drink? Water, tea, coffee?" "Water is fine." I perched on the edge of an angular sofa that looked more like a design statement than functional furniture. "Thanks for agreeing to meet here. I appreciate the privacy." It had been 3 days since our conversation in the park, 3 days of processing the DNA results and their implications. Grant had called last night, suggesting we meet at his place to discuss next steps away from the institutional setting of social services. The invitation had surprised me. Letting me into his personal space seemed like a significant gesture from someone who had always maintained careful boundaries. He returned with 2 glasses of water, settling into a chair across from me. "I spoke with the social worker again this morning. With paternity confirmed, they're fast-tracking the adoption. The home study is already complete, background checks done. We could have final approval within 2 to 3 weeks. That's fast." The timeline made the situation even more real, more immediate. I've also been consulting with specialists, child psychologists, family therapists, about the best way to handle Jake's transition. Not just from foster care to my home, but to understanding his full background. About you, about us, about how he came to be in care. The consideration touched me. What did they recommend? Age-appropriate honesty, introduced gradually. That we establish a stable living situation first, then begin integrating more complex elements of his history as he develops the emotional capacity to understand them. Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But what I really wanted to discuss with you is your role in all this. Beyond the supervised visits." My heart rate quickened. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about what's best for Jake, about children needing both parents when possible." He met my gaze directly. "I'm prepared to support your petition for reinstated parental rights, if that's what you want." The offer stunned me into momentary silence. When I found my voice, it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Why would you do that?" "Because it might be what's best for our son." Grant's expression was uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Look, I'm not approaching this from some sentimental place. I've researched outcomes for children with involved birth parents versus those with closed adoptions. The data supports maintaining biological connections when those connections are healthy." Of course, he'd approached it as a research project, complete with data analysis. Some things never changed. "And you believe my connection with Jake is healthy? Despite my history?" "I've done my due diligence, Rachel. Spoken with Sarah about your consistency in visitation, your progress in recovery. I even had a private investigator verify your employment, your educational status, your participation in support groups." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at this admission. "Old habits." I should have been angry about the invasion of privacy, but I was too focused on the implications of his offer. If my parental rights were reinstated, what would that look like practically? Joint custody? Shared decision-making? Potentially, yes. We'd need to work out the details with family court, establish a formal co-parenting arrangement. He hesitated. It would mean we'd be connected, permanently, through Jake. That we'd need to communicate regularly, make decisions together, present a united front despite our complicated history. The prospect was both tantalizing and terrifying. To be legally recognized as Jake's mother again, to have a voice in his upbringing, to watch him grow up as more than just a visitor in his life. But it would also mean permanent entanglement with Grant, the man who had broken my heart so thoroughly I'd nearly destroyed myself in the aftermath. "I need time to think about this." I set my water glass down carefully. "It's not a simple decision. There are a lot of factors to consider." "Of course." Grant nodded, disappointment flickering briefly across his features. "Take whatever time you need. The offer stands." I stood, needing movement to process the swirl of emotions. The penthouse suddenly felt too small, too intimate, despite its vast square footage. I should go. I have a study group in an hour. Grant walked me to the door, maintaining a respectful distance. Rachel, he said as I stepped into the hallway. For what it's worth, I think you'd be an excellent mother to Jake. The fact that you're even hesitating, considering all angles rather than jumping at the chance, that shows the kind of thoughtfulness he deserves in a parent. The compliment, so unexpected from someone who had once dismissed me so completely, brought heat to my face. Thank you. That means a lot. As the elevator doors closed between us, I leaned against the wall, mind racing. Grant's offer represented everything I'd secretly dreamed of but never allowed myself to hope for: a second chance at motherhood, legal recognition of the bond I'd never stopped feeling despite surrendering my rights. But it also meant binding my life to Grant's, navigating a co-parenting relationship with the man whose rejection had once sent me spiraling into the darkest period of my life. Could I trust him not to hurt me again? Could I trust myself to maintain healthy boundaries while sharing parental responsibilities? And most importantly, would this arrangement truly be best for Jake, or would it simply satisfy my desperate longing to be acknowledged as his mother again? These were questions I couldn't answer alone. I needed perspective from the people who had supported me through recovery, who understood the delicate balance required to maintain sobriety while navigating life's complexities. I needed to talk to Brian. He offered to help reinstate your parental rights? Brian repeated, incredulity evident in his tone. We sat in my favorite corner of the park, far from the playgrounds and picnic areas where families gathered on the pleasant fall afternoon. The same man who left you because you were an impediment to his career goals? The very same. I pulled my cardigan tighter against the breeze. Says he's researched outcomes for children with biological parent involvement versus closed adoptions. That the data supports maintaining connections when they're healthy. Always the businessman, even in family matters. Ryan's expression was thoughtful rather than judgmental, but his conclusion isn't wrong. If you're stable, and you are, having you in Jake's life is probably beneficial for his development and identity formation. So, you think I should accept his offer? I think you need to be very clear about your motivations and expectations before you make any decision. Brian's gaze was direct, challenging in the way that had helped me navigate early recovery. Are you considering this because it's genuinely best for Jake? Or because it fulfills your desire to be acknowledged as his mother again? The question cut to the heart of my uncertainty. Both, if I'm being honest. I want to be Jake's mother, legally, practically, in every way that matters. But I also believe having me in his life is good for him. That knowing his birth mother loves him, has fought to be worthy of him, will help him understand his own story. And what about Grant? How do you feel about being permanently connected to him through a co-parenting relationship? I sighed, watching a leaf spiral from a nearby maple tree. That's the complicated part. Seeing him again has been unsettling. He's not exactly the same person he was 5 years ago. There's a gravitas to him now, a depth that wasn't there before. Less arrogance, more genuine confidence. Brian raised an eyebrow. You sound like you still have feelings for him. Not feelings. Not exactly. I struggled to articulate the complex emotions that seeing Grant again had triggered. More like echoes. Memories of how it felt to be loved by him, before ambition consumed everything else. Dangerous territory for someone in recovery. I know. And I did know. The risk of replacing one addiction with another, of seeking validation from external sources rather than building it from within. That's why I'm hesitating. I need to be sure I can maintain healthy boundaries while co-parenting, that I won't slip into old patterns or expectations. Brian was silent for a moment, considering. What does your sponsor say? That I should focus on what's best for Jake, separate from my feelings about Grant. That I should proceed cautiously, with clear boundaries and ongoing support from my recovery network. Sounds like solid advice. He stretched his legs out in front of him. You know, when I was early in recovery, an old therapist told me something I've never forgotten. She said, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. I'd heard the quote before, but its relevance to my current situation hadn't been clear until now. You think reconnecting with Jake, with Grant, could strengthen my recovery rather than threaten it? If approached with awareness, honesty, and proper support, yes, potentially. Brian's expression was serious. Healthy connections, healthy relationships, are vital to sustained recovery. Isolation is the enemy, but those connections have to be built on truth, not fantasy or projection. Truth, not fantasy, I repeated, letting the wisdom settle. The truth is that I want to be Jake's mother in every sense of the word. But I need to be realistic about what that means, legally, emotionally, practically. And what about Grant? What's your truth there? I considered the question carefully. The truth is that Grant hurt me profoundly, but that was 5 years ago. We're different people now. I need to see him as he is today, not as the man who broke my heart. I need to separate my old feelings from our current situation. That's a good start. Ryan stood, brushing leaves from his jeans. Whatever you decide, remember you're not alone this time. You have a support system, tools for managing difficult emotions, clarity that comes from 2 years of sobriety. As we parted ways, his words echoed in my mind. I wasn't alone. I had support. I had tools. I had clarity. And maybe, just maybe, I could have my son too. The following evening, I texted Grant. I'd like to discuss your offer further. When are you available? His response came within minutes. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. at my place, or I can come to you if that's more comfortable. The consideration in the offer, giving me the option of home field advantage, was another small indication that this wasn't the same Grant who had coldly dismissed my feelings years ago. 7 p.m. at your place works. See you then. I spent the next day in a state of nervous anticipation, running through scenarios and rehearsing what I wanted to say. By the time I arrived at Grant's building, I'd settled on a clear, direct approach, no emotional appeals, just practical considerations focused on Jake's well-being. The doorman announced my arrival, and Grant met me at the elevator. He'd clearly come straight from work, tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, but still exuding the polished professionalism that had always defined him. "Thanks for coming," he said, leading me into the penthouse. "I ordered dinner, if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, just that Thai place you used to like on Henderson Street." The casual reference to our shared past caught me off guard. "You remembered my favorite Thai restaurant?" A hint of color touched his cheeks. "Some details stick with you, I guess." We settled in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, the relative casualness of the setting helping to ease my tension. As we served ourselves from the takeout containers, I noticed Grant watching me with barely concealed curiosity. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry. It's just strange, seeing you here, in my space." After all this time, he shook his head slightly. "Life takes unexpected turns." That's one way to put it. We ate in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes before Grant spoke again. "So, you wanted to discuss the parental rights issue?" Direct as always. "Yes, I've given it a lot of thought, talked it through with people I trust." "And?" I set down my fork, meeting his gaze directly. "I want to accept your offer, to pursue reinstating my parental rights, with your support, but I have conditions." Something like relief flickered across his features. "I'm listening." "First, we need to be absolutely clear that this is about Jake, not about us. Whatever complicated history we have, we keep it separate from our parenting decisions." He nodded. "Agreed." "Second, I need your word that you won't try to use your resources or influence to edge me out once I have legal standing again. This has to be a genuine partnership, not a temporary concession." "I would never," he began, then stopped himself. "That's a fair concern, given our power differential. You have my word. We'll put clear co-parenting parameters in legal documents if that makes you more comfortable." It would. I took a deep breath before continuing. "Third, I need transparency about your motivations. Why are you really offering to help me regain legal rights to our son, when you could easily have him all to yourself?" Grant was quiet for a moment, considering his response. When he spoke, there was a rawness to his voice I'd rarely heard before. "Because I know what it's like to grow up with a parent missing," he said finally. "My mother died when I was 4. Cancer. My father never talked about her, as if erasing her memory would somehow erase the pain. I had everything money could buy, but there was always this absence. This hole in my understanding of who I was." He looked up, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I don't want that for Jake. I don't want him growing up wondering about you, creating fantasies or fears to fill in the blanks. I want him to know his mother, the real you, not some story or silence." The honest emotion in his voice took my breath away. This was a side of Grant I'd rarely glimpsed during our relationship, the wounded child beneath the ambitious exterior, the depth of feeling he typically kept carefully controlled. "Thank you for sharing that," I said softly. "It helps me understand." He cleared his throat, composure returning. "There's also the practical aspect. All research indicates children do best with stable, loving relationships with both parents when possible. You're sober, rebuilding your life. You clearly love Jake. The data supports your involvement." And there was the Grant I knew, translating emotional truth into logical frameworks he could more comfortably navigate. "So we're doing this?" I asked, still half expecting him to withdraw the offer. "We're doing this." He reached for a folder beside his plate, sliding it toward me. My attorney drafted preliminary documents outlining the legal approach. "We'll petition the court for a reconsideration of the termination order based on changed circumstances, your sustained sobriety, stable employment, educational progress, and my support as Jake's biological father." I opened the folder, scanning the legal language without fully absorbing it. What are the chances this will work? Honestly? With my resources behind it? Better than average, but still uncertain. Termination orders are designed to be permanent. His gaze was steady. "Are you prepared for the possibility of failure?" The question cut to the heart of my fear. I've been living with that reality for 2 years. Every day I wake up knowing Jake isn't legally my son anymore. I've learned to function with that pain. I closed the folder carefully. What I haven't had is hope. Real hope that it might change. This gives me that, even with no guarantees. "Hope is a powerful thing," Grant said quietly. "It is." I pushed my plate away, no longer hungry. "When do we start?" "The attorney wants to meet with you tomorrow to go over your testimony, gather documentation of your recovery progress. After that, we file the petition and wait for a court date." "And Jake? When do we tell him about any of this?" Grant's expression softened. "The therapist I consulted suggested waiting until after the legal process is underway. Introducing too much change at once could be destabilizing for him." I nodded, grateful for his thoughtfulness in consulting professionals. "That makes sense. So for now, we continue as we have been. Your adoption proceeds. I maintain my visitation schedule. With one modification, if you're comfortable with it." He hesitated slightly. "I'd like you to start joining some of my visits with Jake, to begin establishing a pattern of us functioning together in his presence. The social worker thinks it might help ease his eventual transition." The prospect of seeing Grant and Jake together, of the three of us interacting as some approximation of a family unit, sent a complicated mixture of emotions through me: hope, anxiety, a dangerous warmth I wasn't ready to examine too closely. "I'd like that," I said simply. As Grant walked me to the door later, having reviewed the legal documents in more detail, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Rachel, there's something else we should discuss before we proceed." His tone had shifted, grown more serious. "My family, specifically, my father. What about him? He'll need to be told about Jake, about the situation, and he can be difficult." Grant's expression clouded. "He has strong opinions about family, about reputation, about doing things the right way. You think he'll object to reinstating my parental rights? I think he'll have concerns about your history, questions about your stability." Grant met my gaze directly. "I want to be upfront about that. He might not be immediately supportive." The warning stung, but I appreciated his honesty. "I've spent 2 years proving myself to skeptics, Grant. I can handle one more." He's not just any skeptic. Lawrence Mitchell has a way of making Mount Everest seem easy to climb. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But he's also fiercely protective of family. Once he accepts Jake as his grandson, that protection will extend to him as well. And to me, as Jake's mother? Eventually, perhaps." Grant's honesty was both painful and refreshing. "I just wanted you to be prepared. This journey won't be without obstacles." As I rode the elevator down from his penthouse, I turned our conversation over in my mind. Every step forward seemed to reveal new complications, new challenges to navigate. Grant's father, the legal hurdles, the emotional complexity of co-parenting with my ex, the careful process of helping Jake understand his own story. Yet beneath the anxiety ran a current of genuine hope, the first I'd allowed myself to feel since signing away my rights to my son 2 years ago. Hope that perhaps, through this bizarre twist of fate, I might get a second chance at motherhood. That Jake might grow up knowing both his parents. That the worst mistake of my life might somehow lead to redemption I'd never dared imagine. Grant's attorney, Margaret Cho, was nothing like the shark in an expensive suit I'd expected. In her mid-50s, with a pragmatic bob and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, she radiated competence rather than intimidation. "Miss Morgan," she greeted me, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Thank you for coming in. I understand we're pursuing an unusual legal strategy here." That's one way to put it. I settled nervously into the chair, clutching my folder of documentation. "Grant said you wanted to review my recovery history?" "Yes, but first, I want to be absolutely clear about something." She removed her glasses, fixing me with a direct gaze. "I represent Grant in this matter, not you. While we're working toward a shared goal, reinstating your parental rights, my fiduciary duty is to my client. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good. That said, Grant has instructed me to pursue this matter with your best interests in mind as well, to the extent they align with his and Jake's." She replaced her glasses, turning to her computer. "Now, let's discuss the documentation you've brought." For the next hour, we methodically reviewed the evidence of my transformed life. Certificates of completion from rehabilitation programs, letters from therapists and my sponsor, employment records, transcripts from my nursing prerequisites, clean drug test results spanning 2 years. "This is all quite impressive," Margaret said, making notes. "The sustained employment is particularly important. Courts want to see stability. I've worked at Lakeside Senior Care for 18 months now. Before that, I had a position at the hospital, but the environment was triggering for my recovery." She nodded approvingly. "Good insight there. Recognizing and avoiding triggers shows maturity in recovery. The court will appreciate that self-awareness." "Will it be enough?" I couldn't help asking. "To overcome the termination order?" Margaret's expression turned serious. "I won't sugarcoat this, Miss Morgan. Reinstating parental rights after voluntary termination is extremely rare. Most jurisdictions consider termination orders permanent and irreversible." My heart sank despite the warning Grant had already given me. "However," she continued, "we have several factors working in our favor. First, the biological father supporting the reinstatement is highly unusual and compelling. Second, your documented recovery shows extraordinary commitment. And third, we can argue that maintaining connection with both biological parents serves Jake's best interests, particularly given the unusual circumstances of his placement with his biological father." "So there's hope?" "There's a path forward," she corrected gently. "Not a guarantee, but a legitimate legal strategy. I wouldn't take the case if I thought it was hopeless." As we wrapped up the meeting, scheduling a follow-up to prepare my testimony for the court hearing, Margaret offered one final piece of advice. "Grant Mitchell is a powerful ally to have in your corner, Miss Morgan. His resources and influence significantly improve your chances." She studied me over her glasses. "But the court will be looking at you, your stability, your commitment, your understanding of Jake's needs. This can't be about what you want. It has to be about what's best for your son." "It is," I assured her. "Everything I've done for the past 2 years has been about becoming someone worthy of being Jake's mother, whether or not I ever regained legal rights. Hold on to that perspective. It will serve you well in court." As I left the imposing glass tower housing Mitchell Technologies' legal team, I felt equal parts hopeful and overwhelmed. The legal process was beginning, wheels set in motion that could potentially restore my status as Jake's mother in the eyes of the law. But the weight of expectation, the scrutiny I would face, the judgment from the court and potentially from Grant's family, all pressed down like a physical burden. One day at a time, I reminded myself, the familiar recovery mantra steadying me. Just as I'd rebuilt my sobriety one day at a time, I would navigate this process the same way, step by step, moment by moment, without becoming overwhelmed by the entirety of the mountain ahead. "He's more relaxed with you than I expected," Grant observed, watching Jake show me his collection of toy dinosaurs. We were in the playroom of Grant's penthouse, a space that had been transformed from a minimalist home office into a child's paradise in remarkably short time. It was our third joint visit with Jake. The social worker had agreed to transition some of my supervised visits to Grant's home to help establish a pattern of cooperative parenting. The arrangement felt strange but promising, the three of us navigating this new dynamic under professional observation. We've had regular visits for almost 2 years. I reminded him, accepting the plastic triceratops Jake handed me with solemn ceremony. He may not know I'm his birth mother, but we've built a relationship. Jake looked between us, his small brow furrowing in the expression so like Grant's. Are you friends now? He asked with a child's directness. Grant and I exchanged glances, momentarily thrown by the question. Yes, Jake, Grant answered carefully. Rachel and I are friends. We both care about you very much. Good, Jake declared, returning to his dinosaurs. Sarah says friends are important. The social worker, observing from a discreet distance, made a note on her clipboard. I wondered what she was recording, Jake's apparent comfort with both of us. The natural way Grant had handled the question? The careful distance we maintained even as we created this simulation of family interaction? After Jake had been escorted back to his foster home, Sarah lingered to debrief us on the visit. He's adjusting well to the new arrangement, she noted. Children are remarkably resilient, especially when the adults in their lives present a united, stable front. When will the adoption be finalized? Grant asked, his business efficiency returning now that Jake was no longer present. The court date is set for next Friday. Barring any unforeseen complications, you'll have legal custody that day. Sarah turned to me with professional compassion. Miss Morgan, I understand you filed a petition for reconsideration of the termination order? Yes, with Grant's support. That's unusual, but not unwelcome. She closed her folder decisively. Jake clearly benefits from both your presences in his life. Whatever the legal outcome, I hope you'll continue to work together as effectively as you have been. After she left, an awkward silence descended. Grant busied himself straightening the toys Jake had left scattered across the playroom floor. You don't have to do that, I said. I'm sure you have a housekeeper or something. I do, but I'm trying to develop better habits for when Jake lives here. He placed a dinosaur precisely on a shelf. Children need to see adults modeling responsibility, not just outsourcing it. The comment surprised me. Another glimpse of the research Grant had clearly been doing on effective parenting. You're taking this seriously. Of course I am. He looked up, a flash of irritation crossing his features. Did you think I wouldn't? I didn't know what to think, I admitted. The Grant I knew 5 years ago wasn't exactly focused on family values. The Grant you knew 5 years ago was an ambitious idiot who thought success could only be measured in stock prices and market share. He straightened, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. People change, Rachel. I've changed. I'm beginning to see that. I helped him collect the remaining toys, our hands occasionally brushing in the process, each contact sending an unwelcome spark of awareness through me. What made you want to adopt in the first place? Before you knew about Jake, I mean. Grant was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Perspective, I suppose. Reaching all my professional goals and realizing they weren't enough. Watching colleagues with families, seeing a fullness in their lives that was missing in mine, his expression softened. And maybe some unconscious desire for redemption. Redemption? For the way things ended between us. He met my gaze directly. I've had a lot of time to reflect on how I handled that. It wasn't my finest moment. The admission, so close to an apology, caught me off guard. No, it wasn't. For what it's worth, I regretted it almost immediately. Tried to convince myself I'd made the right decision, that the relationship was holding me back professionally. Threw myself into work to avoid facing the truth. Which was that I'd made a colossal mistake. His honesty was disarming. By the time I admitted it to myself, you weren't returning my calls. Then I saw you at that fundraiser with Eric Johnson, looking happy, and I told myself it was for the best. The memory of that night, me pretending to be fine, using Eric as a shield against gossip while internally falling apart, created a lump in my throat. I wasn't happy. I was unraveling. That was right around when the pills started. Grant's face registered genuine pain. I didn't know. I should have seen it, should have reached out more persistently. It wouldn't have mattered, I said, the old anger rising. You made your choice. You decided your career trajectory was more important than our relationship. You walked away. And you spiraled into addiction, nearly died of an overdose, and our son spent the first 3 years of his life in foster care. The rawness in his voice matched my own. Don't you think I understand the consequences of my actions now? Don't you think I replay that decision every time I look at Jake? The naked regret in his expression stopped my retort cold. For the first time, I truly saw the weight he carried, the knowledge that his choices had set in motion a chain of events that had nearly destroyed multiple lives. I'm sorry, I said, surprising myself with the apology. I didn't mean to dredge all this up again. We agreed to focus on Jake, not our past. No, you're right to hold me accountable, he sighed, the sound heavy with regret. I just want you to know that I understand my part in what happened. The man who broke up with you for the sake of his career trajectory isn't the same man standing here today. The vulnerability in his admission disarmed me completely. I believe you. We finished cleaning in silence, the atmosphere charged with unspoken emotions and complicated history. As I gathered my things to leave, Grant hesitated at the door. There's something else we need to discuss, he said. My father wants to meet you before the adoption hearing. He's invited us to dinner tomorrow night at his house. Anxiety immediately flared. Is that necessary? You said yourself he might not be supportive. It's necessary if we want his backing for the parental rights petition. His influence with certain judges could be helpful. Grant's expression was apologetic but firm. I know it's asking a lot, but it would really help our case. The hour caught my attention, the casual acknowledgement that we were in this together, a team working toward a shared goal. All right, I agreed reluctantly. But you need to prepare me. What should I expect? Lawrence Mitchell is old school. Traditional values, believes in the importance of appearances, judges people quickly, and changes his mind slowly. Grant's description didn't ease my concerns. He'll have researched you thoroughly, so don't try to hide anything about your past. Be honest, but focus on your recovery, your current stability. Should I dress up? Act a certain way? Just be yourself, Rachel. His smile held surprising warmth. The version of yourself who's fought back from rock bottom, who shows up consistently for Jake, despite having no legal obligation to do so. That woman is pretty impressive. The unexpected compliment brought heat to my cheeks. I'll try not to mess this up. You won't. His confidence in me was both strange and oddly fortifying. I'll pick you up at 6:30? As I left the penthouse, mentally cataloging my limited wardrobe for something appropriate for dinner with a billionaire patriarch, I realized how surreal my life had become. One moment, I was counting medication doses at the senior care facility. The next, I was preparing to dine with one of the city's most powerful families, all because of a cosmic coincidence that had brought Grant back into my life through our son. The universe did indeed have a twisted sense of humor. But perhaps, just perhaps, it also had a plan. Lawrence Mitchell's estate sprawled across 3 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city's suburbs. The main house, a Georgian mansion with gleaming columns and perfect symmetry, spoke of old money and meticulous taste, a stark contrast to Grant's modern minimalist penthouse. Don't be intimidated, Grant advised as the security gate swung open for his car. It's just a house. A house with its own zip code, maybe. I smoothed the front of my dress, a simple navy sheath I'd splurged on for nursing school interviews. The nicest thing I owned. Your father lives here alone? With a staff of 6, yes. Grant's smile held a hint of self-awareness. The Mitchell men aren't known for our moderation. A butler, an actual, honest-to-God butler, opened the massive front door as we approached. Mr. Mitchell, Miss Morgan. Mr. Mitchell Sr. is waiting in the study. Grant's hand settled briefly at the small of my back, guiding me through the marble-floored foyer. The gesture was probably unconscious, but the brief warmth of his palm against my spine sent an unwelcome flutter through me. Lawrence Mitchell rose from behind an imposing mahogany desk as we entered the book-lined study. In his early 70s, he remained an impressive figure, tall like his son, with the same piercing blue eyes but silver hair and deeper lines of authority etched into his features. Grant. He extended his hand to his son in a formal greeting that struck me as oddly distant for family. And Miss Morgan, I've been looking forward to meeting you. His assessing gaze made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for having me. Lawrence, please. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We're discussing family matters, after all. I recognized the subtle emphasis on discussing, a reminder that nothing was settled, that my place in this family tableau was far from assured. Drink, Lawrence gestured to a crystal decanter on a side table. Just water for me, thank you, I replied, noting his slightly raised eyebrow at my refusal. I don't drink alcohol. Part of my recovery program. Grant shot me an approving glance at my directness. I'll have the same. Lawrence nodded to the butler, who materialized with waters for Grant and me, scotch for himself. Shall we sit? We have much to discuss before dinner. The discussion proved to be more of an interview, with Lawrence probing every aspect of my past, my recovery, my education and career goals. He asked pointed questions about my financial situation, my support system, my long-term plans for staying sober. Though his tone remained professionally courteous, the intensity of his scrutiny was exhausting. You understand my concerns, he said after nearly 40 minutes of questioning. A child's well-being is at stake. My grandson's well-being. The possessive claim, made before he'd even met Jake, raised my hackles. I understand completely. If I were in your position, I'd have the same questions about someone with my history. Yet you believe, despite that history, that you should have legal rights to the child you surrendered? Grant tensed beside me. Father. It's all right. I interrupted, meeting Lawrence's gaze directly. Yes, I do believe I should have legal rights to Jake, with appropriate safeguards in place. Not because I deserve a second chance, though I hope I do, but because Jake deserves to know his mother. To understand that he wasn't abandoned, that he's loved, that his story isn't defined by my worst mistakes. Lawrence studied me, his expression unreadable. And if you relapse, addiction has a distressingly high recurrence rate. If I relapse, the custody agreement would include provisions for that possibility. Jake's safety and stability would be protected. I leaned forward slightly. But I won't relapse, Mr. Mitchell. Not because I'm making you a promise, but because I make that commitment to myself every single day. Recovery isn't a destination I've reached. It's a path I walk daily, with full awareness of what's at stake. A moment of silence followed my statement. Then, unexpectedly, Lawrence nodded with what appeared to be grudging respect. You're more articulate than your file suggested, he commented, as if this observation constituted high praise. My file? I glanced at Grant, who had the grace to look embarrassed. Standard procedure, Lawrence waved off my concern. Background checks are simply due diligence when family interests are involved. Before I could respond to this casual invasion of privacy, the butler announced dinner. As we moved to the formal dining room, a cavernous space that could have comfortably seated 20, Lawrence continued his interrogation, albeit in a slightly less prosecutorial tone. By the time dessert arrived, I felt emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic. Lawrence's questions had shifted from skeptical to practical, focusing on logistics of co-parenting and education plans for Jake rather than dwelling on my addiction history. You've clearly given this considerable thought, he conceded as coffee was served. And your commitment to your recovery is evident. Thank you. I still have reservations, naturally. Trust must be earned over time. His gaze shifted to Grant. But I'm willing to support your petition for reinstatement of parental rights, with certain conditions. Relief washed through me. What conditions? Regular drug testing, for one. Continued documentation of employment and education progress. A graduated custody arrangement that prioritizes stability for Jake. Lawrence enumerated these points as if reviewing a business contract, and an understanding that if there's any indication of instability or relapse, my resources will be fully deployed to protect my grandson's interests. The threat beneath the offer of support was clear, but not unreasonable given the circumstances. I can agree to those terms. Good, Lawrence nodded decisively. Grant, have Margaret draw up the appropriate documentation. I'll make some calls regarding the court date. Just like that, the negotiation was complete, the terms of my acceptance into the Mitchell family ecosystem established with businesslike efficiency. As Lawrence excused himself to take a call, leaving Grant and me alone in the cavernous dining room, I exhaled slowly. That went better than expected, Grant observed, a hint of surprise in his voice. Did it? I feel like I just underwent a hostile corporate acquisition. He smiled, a genuine smile that softened his features and reminded me painfully of our earlier days together. You impressed him, Rachel, I can tell. How? He looked at me like I was something the cat dragged in. He offered his support. Trust me, that's significant. My father doesn't change course easily once he's made a judgment. Grant's expression grew more serious. Thank you for doing this. I know it wasn't easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. The old saying slipped out automatically, a remnant from recovery meetings. No, it isn't. His gaze held mine for a moment too long, something unspoken passing between us before he looked away. We should go. I'll drive you home. The ride back to my apartment was quietly companionable, both of us processing the evening's events. As Grant pulled up outside my modest building, a stark contrast to the luxury we just left, he turned to me with unexpected intensity. I meant what I said earlier. You were impressive tonight. His voice had softened, grown more personal than professional. The way you handled my father's questions, your honesty about your recovery, your focus on Jake's needs rather than your own desires. It was, I don't know. I'm proud to be doing this with you. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, warming something inside me that I'd tried to keep carefully frozen. Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you. What do you mean, especially from me? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Your opinion mattered to me once, more than I care to admit. When you ended things, when you made it clear I wasn't what you wanted, it broke something in me. Grant's expression registered genuine pain. Rachel, No, please. Let me finish. I gathered my courage to say what I'd needed to for years. I don't blame you for my addiction. Those were my choices, my mistakes. But I need you to understand that your rejection was the catalyst, the beginning of a very dark time. So yes, your approval now means something, because it helps heal a wound that never quite closed properly. The vulnerability in my admission hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us was ready to fully explore. I was wrong, Grant said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Not just about us, but about what mattered, about what success really means. I was chasing external validation, from my father, from the board, from the business press, and I threw away the most real thing in my life to do it. The raw honesty in his words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. We can't go back, Grant. Too much has happened. I know. He reached across the console, hesitating before gently taking my hand. But maybe we can build something new, something better. For Jake's sake, if nothing else. For Jake's sake. The necessary qualifier, the safe boundary around whatever was developing between us. Yet, as his thumb traced a small circle on my palm, a gesture so intimate it sent shivers up my arm, I wondered if we were both using our son as a shield against confronting the unresolved emotions that still simmered beneath the surface. For Jake's sake, I agreed, slowly withdrawing my hand. Good night, Grant. Good night, Rachel. As I watched his car pull away, I pressed my palm against my cheek, feeling the lingering warmth of his touch and the dangerous flutter it had triggered in my chest. This complicated dance we were engaged in, co-parents, former lovers, tentative allies in the quest to create a family for our son, was treading perilously close to emotional territory I wasn't sure I was ready to revisit. One day at a time, I reminded myself as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. Today, I'd survive dinner with Lawrence Mitchell. Tomorrow, I'd continue preparing for the court hearing. The day after that, who knew? But whatever came, I would face it with the tools and clarity that 2 years of sobriety had given me. Even if those tools were being severely tested by the reemergence of Grant Mitchell in my life. All rise. The family court of the 3rd Judicial District is now in session, the Honorable Judge Eleanor Walters presiding. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate than the grand halls of justice depicted in television dramas. Grant sat beside me at the petitioner's table, Margaret Cho on his other side, a united front presenting our unusual case to the court. 2 weeks had passed since the dinner with Lawrence Mitchell. In that time, Grant's adoption of Jake had been finalized with remarkable speed, the DNA confirmation of biological paternity, creating an expedited pathway through the system. Jake had moved from his foster home to Grant's penthouse 3 days ago, the transition supervised by social workers and child psychologists to ensure minimal disruption. And now, here we were, pursuing the even more unlikely goal of reinstating my terminated parental rights. This is case number FC20234587, in the matter of Jacob Mitchell, a minor child. The clerk announced, petition for reconsideration of termination of parental rights. Judge Walters, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, reviewed the file before her with methodical care. This is an unusual petition, she noted, looking up at our table. Ms. Cho, please explain the basis for your motion. Margaret rose, the picture of professional competence. Your Honor, we're seeking reconsideration of the termination of parental rights previously entered against Rachel Morgan with respect to the minor child Jacob Mitchell. We believe this case presents extraordinary circumstances that justify this exceptional remedy. Extraordinary indeed, Judge Walters commented dryly. I note that the child has recently been adopted by his biological father, who is now supporting the biological mother's petition to reinstate her rights. Most unusual. Yes, Your Honor. The circumstances are, to our knowledge, unprecedented. Mr. Mitchell adopted Jacob through standard channels, unaware that Jacob was his biological child. Miss Morgan recognized Mr. Mitchell during a scheduled visitation and revealed their shared biological connection to the child. And DNA testing has confirmed paternity? Yes, Your Honor. The results are included in Exhibit A of our petition. The judge flipped through the file, her expression unreadable. In the current custody arrangement, the child is residing with Mr. Mitchell? Yes, Your Honor. The adoption was finalized 2 weeks ago. Jacob has been living with Mr. Mitchell since Monday, with a transition plan developed by licensed child psychologists. I see. Judge Walters removed her glasses, fixing her gaze directly on me. Miss Morgan, you voluntarily surrendered your parental rights to Jacob when he was 6 months old. The law considers such surrenders permanent and irrevocable. Why should this court make an exception in your case? This was the moment Margaret had prepared me for. The direct questioning from the judge that would likely determine the outcome of our petition. I rose on shaky legs, grateful for Grant's supportive nod from beside me. Your Honor, I surrendered my rights at the lowest point in my life. I was deep in addiction, unable to care for myself, let alone a vulnerable infant. At that moment, termination was the right decision for Jacob's well-being. I took a steadying breath. But in the 2 years since, I've rebuilt my life from the ground up. I've maintained continuous sobriety, secured stable employment, pursued education toward a nursing degree, and most importantly, maintained regular visits with Jacob despite having no legal obligation to do so. Many parents make similar progress, Miss Morgan. The law doesn't typically allow for do-overs in these matters. I understand, Your Honor. I'm not asking for a do-over or for the court to pretend my past actions didn't occur. I gestured toward Grant. What makes this situation truly unique is that Jacob's biological father, who was unaware of his existence until recently, now has custody and is supporting my petition. We're not asking the court to remove Jacob from his current placement or disrupt his stability. We're asking for legal recognition of a relationship that already exists, in a framework that prioritizes Jacob's well-being above all else. The judge considered this, tapping her pen thoughtfully against the file. Mr. Mitchell, you've recently adopted this child, only to discover he is biologically yours. Now you're supporting his birth mother's petition to share legal rights you've just obtained. Why? Grant stood, his posture reflecting the confidence that had made him a formidable business leader. Your Honor, I believe children deserve connections to both biological parents when those connections are healthy and stable. Miss Morgan has proven her commitment to sobriety and to Jacob through 2 years of consistent visitation and life reconstruction. Research consistently shows that children benefit from knowing their biological origins and maintaining meaningful relationships with birth parents when possible. This isn't about research, Mr. Mitchell. This is about a specific child and what serves his best interests. Exactly, Your Honor. And Jacob's best interests are served by having both his biological parents legally recognized and involved in his life, with appropriate safeguards to ensure his stability and well-being. Judge Walters nodded thoughtfully, then turned her attention to the state's attorney, who presented the standard opposition to reinstatement of terminated rights, arguing for the finality of termination orders, expressing concern about setting precedent, questioning whether changes in circumstances were sufficient to overcome the legal presumption against reinstatement. Throughout the proceeding, I maintained the calm, focused demeanor Margaret had coached me to present. Inside, however, my emotions churned like a storm, hope and fear battling for dominance as my son's future and my legal relationship to him hung in the balance. After nearly 2 hours of testimony, including statements from my sponsor, my employer, and, most surprisingly, Lawrence Mitchell himself, who appeared to lend his considerable reputation to our petition, Judge Walters called a brief recess to consider her ruling. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Grant handed me a bottle of water. "You're doing great," he said quietly. Your testimony was perfect, honest, focused on Jake's needs rather than your own. It doesn't matter how perfect it was if the judge follows the standard interpretation of the law. I twisted the cap off the water with shaking hands. Termination orders are meant to be permanent. We're asking for an extraordinary exception. The circumstances are extraordinary. Grant's confidence was unwavering. And Judge Walters has a reputation for prioritizing children's welfare over strict legal constructs when the situation warrants it. Before I could respond, the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. Judge Walters had returned, her expression giving no hint of her decision as we resumed our positions. This is an unusual case that presents novel legal questions regarding the permanence of termination orders when extraordinary circumstances arise, she began, her tone measured and deliberate. The court must balance several competing interests, the legal presumption favoring finality in termination proceedings, the child's interest in stability and permanence, and the emerging evidence regarding the importance of biological connections when those connections can be safely maintained. She shuffled her papers, the rustling unnaturally loud in the silent courtroom. Having reviewed the evidence presented, including documentation of Miss Morgan's sustained sobriety, employment stability, ongoing education, and consistent visitation history, as well as Mr. Mitchell's support for reinstating Miss Morgan's parental rights and their proposed co-parenting framework, I find that this case presents the rare circumstances where reconsideration of termination is appropriate. My heart leaped into my throat, hope surging so powerfully, I felt lightheaded. Beside me, Grant reached for my hand, squeezing it supportively. However, Judge Walters continued, tempering my elation, such reinstatement must be structured to prioritize Jacob's stability and well-being. Therefore, the court grants the petition for reconsideration with the following conditions. She enumerated a series of requirements: continued documentation of my sobriety, graduated custody arrangement, beginning with supervised visitation transitioning to overnight visits on a carefully structured timeline, joint legal custody with Grant retaining primary physical custody for a minimum of 2 years, regular court reviews to ensure compliance and assess Jacob's adjustment. In essence, she concluded, the court is creating a path for Miss Morgan to rebuild her legal relationship with her son gradually, in a manner that protects his stability while acknowledging the progress she has made in the unique circumstances of this case. This order will be reviewed in 6 months to assess whether adjustments to the custody arrangement are warranted based on Jacob's adjustment and Miss Morgan's continued stability. She signed the order with a decisive flourish. Court is adjourned. The moment the judge left the bench, I turned to Grant, unable to contain the emotions flooding through me. She granted it. She actually granted it. She did. His smile was wide, genuine, his own joy evident. Congratulations, Rachel. You're legally Jacob's mother again. The simple statement, the acknowledgement of a reality that had never changed in my heart despite the legal severance, broke the dam of composure I'd maintained throughout the hearing. Tears spilled down my cheeks as 2 years of carefully managed hope finally found release. Without thinking, I threw my arms around Grant's neck, overwhelmed by the moment. He returned the embrace without hesitation, holding me tightly as I processed the enormity of what had just happened. Thank you, I whispered against his shoulder. I couldn't have done this without you. You did the hard part, he murmured, his breath warm against my hair. 2 years of rebuilding your life, showing up for Jake even when there was no guarantee it would lead to this moment. All I did was provide resources and support. We separated slowly, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment and the curious gazes of court personnel. Margaret approached with a smile, extending her hand in professional congratulations. A favorable outcome, as we hoped. The conditions are reasonable and actually align well with the graduated custody plan we proposed. She gathered her documents efficiently. We'll need to meet next week to go over the specifics of implementation, but today is for celebration. As we left the courthouse, stepping into the bright autumn sunshine, the reality continued to sink in. I was legally Jake's mother again. After 2 years of limbo, of loving him from a distance with no recognized rights, I had a legal relationship with my son, a framework for being part of his life in a meaningful, lasting way. What now? I asked, blinking in the sunlight. What do we tell Jake? How do we explain all of this? Grant checked his watch, an automatic gesture that reminded me of our first relationship, when time had always been carefully allocated according to priorities. Jake is with the nanny until 6. Why don't we get lunch and discuss next steps? The child psychologist gave me some materials about introducing complex family information at age-appropriate levels. The practicality of his approach, research-backed, systematic, thorough, was so quintessentially Grant that it made me smile despite the overwhelming emotions of the day. Always prepared, aren't you? I try to be. His answering smile held a hint of self-deprecation. Though I've learned that some of life's most significant moments can't be planned for or controlled. Finding out I have a son being the prime example. As we walked toward a nearby restaurant, Grant's hand settled lightly at the small of my back, that same unconscious gesture of guidance that had been sending unwelcome flutters through me with increasing frequency. Today, emotionally raw from the court hearing, I couldn't summon the willpower to step away from the contact. Just this once, I told myself. Just today, while we celebrate this victory for Jake, tomorrow I would reinstate the careful boundaries necessary for effective co-parenting without emotional complications. But deep down, a part of me wondered if those boundaries were already crumbling, and whether trying to rebuild them might be fighting against a tide too powerful to resist. The restaurant Grant selected was upscale but comfortable, with private booths that allowed for confidential conversation. As we settled in, the enormity of what had just happened continued to wash over me in waves. I still can't believe it, I said, staring at the water glass in front of me. I have legal rights to Jake again. Believe it. Grant's expression was softer than I'd seen it in years. You earned this, Rachel. Every day of sobriety, every visit you never missed, every step you took to rebuild your life, it all led to this moment. The sincere praise from someone who had once dismissed me so completely created a complicated warmth in my chest. We still have a long road ahead. Telling Jake, establishing a co-parenting routine, navigating all the conditions the judge set. One day at a time, right? He referenced my recovery mantra with surprising gentleness. Today, we celebrate this victory. Tomorrow, we tackle the next step. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. So what does the child psychologist recommend about explaining all this to Jake? Grant reached for his briefcase, extracting a folder with his typical efficiency. Dr. Winters suggests a gradual, age-appropriate approach. For a 3-year-old, simple honesty without overwhelming detail is key. He passed me a sheet with bullet-pointed recommendations. As I scanned it, I was struck by how thoroughly Grant had prepared, how seriously he took his new role as Jake's father. This wasn't the same man who had ruthlessly prioritized his career over everything else 5 years ago. She suggests we start by establishing that I'm Jake's biological mother, using simple terms he can understand. That I wasn't able to take care of him when he was a baby because I was sick, but I'm better now. I glanced up. No mention of addiction yet, that comes later, when he's old enough to understand. Exactly. And we explained that you and I made him together, but weren't able to be a family when he was born. That we both love him very much, and now we're going to work together to take care of him. Grant traced the rim of his water glass thoughtfully. The key is presenting it as a positive development, not as a disruption or complication. And the living arrangements, the graduated custody schedule? We tell him he'll continue living primarily at my place, but that he'll start spending more time with you, first visits, then occasional overnights as he adjusts. Grant hesitated. Dr. Winters actually suggested that you spend time at my penthouse initially, rather than taking Jake to an unfamiliar environment. If you're comfortable with that. The prospect of spending extended time in Grant's personal space sent a flutter of anxiety through me. I'm not sure that's a good idea. It's just a recommendation based on child development research. Children this age need consistency during transitions. His tone remained neutral, professional. We could convert the guest suite into your space when you're there. Complete privacy, separate entrance if you want it. The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, his consideration of my need for independence and boundaries, made it difficult to refuse outright. Let me think about it. It might be the right approach for Jake, but we'd need clear parameters. Of course. Grant nodded, immediately respectful of my hesitation. Whatever you decide, we'll make it work. As our lunch arrived, the conversation shifted to practical matters, the schedule for gradually increasing my time with Jake, how to coordinate medical appointments and preschool activities, the routine we wanted to establish to provide stability during the transition. Throughout the discussion, I was struck by Grant's careful attention to detail, his genuine commitment to creating an environment where Jake could thrive with both parents in his life. You've really done your homework on child development. I observed as he outlined a proposed bedtime routine that would remain consistent regardless of which parent Jake was with. Something like embarrassment crossed his features. I may have gone slightly overboard with the research. When I decided to adopt, I approached it like any other major project: comprehensive analysis, expert consultation, implementation strategy. That's very you. I couldn't help smiling at his systematic approach to parenthood. Too corporate. He looked genuinely concerned. No, actually, it's reassuring. I surprised myself with the admission. You're taking this seriously, preparing thoroughly. Jake deserves that kind of thoughtfulness. Relief softened his expression. I want to get this right, Rachel. For his sake, for all our sakes. There it was again, that hint of something beyond co-parenting, a suggestion of a deeper connection neither of us was ready to name. I focused on my salad, unwilling to examine the implications too closely. When should we tell him? I asked, steering us back to safer ground. About me being his biological mother? Dr. Winters suggested doing it soon, before he fully settles into new routines with me. This weekend, perhaps? That would give us time to prepare, and you could stay for dinner afterward, start establishing a pattern of regular interaction at my place. The prospect of telling Jake the truth, of being acknowledged as his mother in more than just the legal sense, filled me with equal parts anticipation and terror. What if he rejects me? What if it's too confusing for him? He won't reject you. He already has a relationship with you through your visits. We're just giving that relationship a name, a context. Grant's confidence was steady, grounding, and children are remarkably adaptable, especially when the adults in their lives present a united, supportive front. A united front. I repeated the phrase, testing its weight. That's what we are now, I guess. Co-parents. Partners in raising Jake. Partners, Grant agreed, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. A different kind of partnership than we once had, but perhaps a more meaningful one. The subtle reference to our former relationship hung between us, neither acknowledged nor dismissed. As we finished lunch and prepared to part ways, me to my afternoon shift at the senior care facility, Grant to a board meeting, he hesitated at the restaurant entrance. Rachel, he began, uncharacteristically uncertain. I want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to work with me on this. I know it can't be easy, given our history. I'm doing it for Jake, I said automatically, the safe answer that kept emotional complications at bay. Of course. For Jake. He nodded, accepting the boundary. I'll call you tomorrow to finalize plans for the weekend? That works. As I watched him walk to his waiting car, tall and confident in his perfect suit, every inch the successful CEO, I tried to reconcile the man he was now with the one who had broken my heart so thoroughly 5 years ago. The Grant who had coldly informed me that I no longer fit into his 5-year plan seemed worlds away from this thoughtful father who consulted child psychologists and created detailed co-parenting strategies. People change, I reminded myself as I headed toward the bus stop. I was living proof of that transformation, from addict to recovering nurse's aide, from someone who had surrendered her child to a mother legally recognized once again. Why was it so hard to believe Grant could change too? The answer, of course, was simple. Because believing in his transformation meant opening myself to vulnerability again. And that was a risk I wasn't sure I was ready to take, regardless of the flutter in my chest when he smiled or the warmth of his hand at the small of my back. One day at a time, I reminded myself. Today was for celebrating the legal victory. Tomorrow was for planning Jake's transition. The complicated feelings resurfacing for Grant Mitchell? Those could wait for another day. Do you remember how babies grow in mommy's tummies before they're born? Grant asked, sitting beside Jake on the living room sofa of his penthouse. I perched nervously in an armchair across from them, heart pounding as we began the carefully rehearsed conversation. Jake nodded solemnly. Like in the book about the baby bird. They start tiny and get bigger and bigger until it's time to come out. That's right. Grant smiled, his patience with Jake's 3-year-old understanding remarkable. Well, every baby has a mommy and a daddy who help make them. The daddy gives a tiny seed, and the mommy has a tiny egg, and when they come together, they start growing into a baby. Jake looked between us, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Like planting seeds in the garden at school? Kind of like that, yes. I leaned forward slightly. Jake, do you know who your daddy is? He pointed to Grant without hesitation. Daddy Grant. He adopted me because my first family couldn't keep me. The simple acceptance of this narrative, clearly explained to him during the adoption process, nearly broke my heart. He had no idea yet that his first family included me. "That's right, I'm your daddy," Grant confirmed. "But there's something special about our family that we wanted to tell you. Something amazing." Jake's eyes widened with interest. "A surprise?" "A happy surprise," I said carefully. "You know how I come to visit you every week? How we read books together and play with your dinosaurs?" He nodded, smiling. "You're good at dinosaur voices." "Well, Jake, I visit you because I'm someone very special to you." I took a deep breath. The moment I dreamed of for 2 years finally here. "I'm your first mommy. I grew you in my tummy before you were born." Jake stared at me, processing this information with the serious concentration that reminded me so much of Grant. "You're my first mommy? From my tummy?" "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy Grant and I made you together, a long time ago." I kept my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "But when you were born, I was very sick. Not the kind of sick with coughs and sneezes, but a different kind of sickness that made it hard for me to take care of a baby." "So you couldn't keep me?" His direct question pierced straight to the heart of the matter. "I couldn't take care of you properly then, and I wanted you to have the best care possible." I blinked back tears, determined to maintain composure for Jake's sake. "So other families helped take care of you while I worked on getting better. And now Daddy adopted me." Jake looked to Grant for confirmation of this part of the story he already knew. "That's right," Grant said gently. "But here's the amazing part. I didn't know when I adopted you that I was actually your biological daddy. Biological means I helped make you with Rachel before you were born." Jake's eyes widened. "You didn't know?" "I didn't know," Grant confirmed. "It was a wonderful surprise when Rachel told me. Like finding a treasure I didn't even know was mine." The beautiful simplification of our complicated situation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Leave it to Grant to find the perfect analogy for a 3-year-old. "And now Rachel, your biological mommy, is feeling much better," Grant continued. "She's been working very hard to get healthy, so she can be part of your life in a bigger way." Jake turned those solemn eyes to me. "Are you all better now?" "I'm much better," I said carefully, mindful of Dr. Winter's guidance about honesty without overwhelming detail. "Getting better is something I work on every day, like how you practice writing your letters or building with blocks. But I'm strong enough now to help take care of you, along with your daddy." He seemed to consider this information carefully. "So you're my mommy from my tummy, and now you're going to be my mommy for real too?" The simple question, cutting straight to the heart of what I'd fought so hard for, nearly undid me completely. "Yes, Jake. If that's okay with you, I'd like to be your mommy for real now." He surprised us both by sliding off the sofa and walking over to my chair. With the straightforward acceptance that only children seem capable of, he climbed into my lap and laid his head against my shoulder. "I always wanted a mommy," he said simply. The dam broke. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I held my son, truly held him as his mother, acknowledged and recognized. For what felt like the first time. Over Jake's head, I met Grant's gaze, seeing my own emotion reflected in his eyes. "We'll be a different kind of family," Grant explained gently, as Jake remained cuddled in my arms. "You'll live here with me most of the time, but you'll also start spending more time with your mommy. First for visits, then for sleepovers when we get everything ready." "Will you both read me stories?" Jake asked, the practicalities of this new arrangement apparently more important to him than the complex emotional dynamics. "Absolutely," I assured him, savoring the weight of him against me. "And we'll have dinners together sometimes, and go to the park, and do all kinds of family things." "Like Tommy's family?" Jake referenced his friend from preschool. "His mommy and daddy don't live in the same house either." "Similar to that, yes," Grant confirmed. "The important thing is that we both love you very much, and we're going to work together to take care of you." Jake seemed satisfied with this explanation, his 3-year-old mind processing the information in his own way. After a few more minutes of questions, practical inquiries about where he would sleep in my apartment, whether his dinosaurs could come too, if we could have ice cream to celebrate, he asked to go play with his toys, apparently having integrated this life-changing information with remarkable ease. As he disappeared into his playroom, I wiped the tears from my cheeks, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "That went better than I expected," Grant said quietly, handing me a tissue. "Children are resilient," I agreed, dabbing at my eyes. Dr. Winter said he might need time to fully process, that he could have questions or reactions in the coming days. We'll handle those as they come. Grant settled into the chair beside me, watching the doorway where Jake had disappeared. But that initial acceptance, Rachel, did you see his face when you confirmed you're his biological mother? There was recognition there, some instinctive understanding. I saw it. The memory brought fresh tears. I've dreamed of this moment for so long, but the reality is overwhelming. In a good way? In the best possible way. I turned to face him directly. Thank you, Grant, for supporting this, for helping make it happen, for handling the conversation so beautifully with him. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability rarely glimpsed beneath his controlled exterior. Seeing you with him just now, it was like watching something click into place. Something that should have been there all along. The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep inside me, something I'd been carefully guarding against since his reappearance in my life. Before I could examine the feeling too closely, Jake called from the playroom, asking us to come see his latest dinosaur arrangement. The moment passed, but its impact lingered as we moved forward with our planned afternoon. A casual dinner together, bath time with Jake, where I observed Grant's established routine, the bedtime story ritual, where I was invited to participate. Throughout it all, we maintained a careful co-parenting dynamic, focused entirely on Jake's comfort and adjustment to this new family configuration. Yet, beneath the practical arrangements ran an undercurrent of something deeper, shared glances over Jake's head, the brush of hands passing toys or books, moments of genuine connection as we witnessed our son processing the revelation of his origins. As I prepared to leave that evening, Jake already asleep in his new bedroom, Grant walked me to the door with uncharacteristic hesitation in his movements. Would you consider what we discussed at lunch? He asked. About spending time here during the transition period? The guest suite is completely separate, with its own bathroom and sitting area. It might help Jake adjust more smoothly to having you in his life in this new way. The request seemed purely practical, focused on Jake's needs rather than any personal agenda. Still, the prospect of sharing living space with Grant, however temporarily, sent warning signals flashing through my carefully maintained defenses. I'll think about it, I promised. It makes sense for Jake's sake, but we'd need to establish clear boundaries. Absolutely. His immediate agreement was reassuring. This would be entirely on your terms, Rachel. Nothing more than co-parenting in a way that eases Jake's transition. As I rode the elevator down from his penthouse, I wondered if I was being overly cautious or not cautious enough. The voice of my sponsor echoed in my mind. In recovery, we learn to trust our instincts again, the ones that addiction once silenced. But we also learn to distinguish between legitimate caution and fear-based isolation. Was my hesitation about spending time at Grant's place legitimate caution based on our complicated history? Or was it fear preventing me from fully embracing this unexpected second chance at family? I didn't have an answer yet. But watching Jake's face as he processed that I was his mommy from his tummy had shifted something fundamental inside me, a willingness to consider possibilities I'd previously dismissed. For his sake, if not for my own. The next 6 weeks unfolded in a careful dance of incremental changes and adjustments. Following the child psychologist's recommendations, we established a schedule where I initially spent evenings at Grant's penthouse 3 times a week, participating in Jake's regular routines while maintaining my own apartment and work schedule. The guest suite Grant had offered proved to be a genuine sanctuary, a spacious bedroom with attached sitting area and bathroom, beautifully appointed but not ostentatious, with a separate entrance that allowed me to come and go independently. He had thoughtfully stocked it with essentials and left the decor neutral, inviting me to add personal touches if I wished. This is hardly a guest suite, I observed during my first evening stay. It's bigger than my entire apartment. I may have had some renovations done before you moved in, Grant admitted, looking slightly embarrassed at the extravagance. The space wasn't quite this developed originally. The realization that he had specifically remodeled for my comfort touched me unexpectedly. Throughout these transition weeks, Grant continued to surprise me with his thoughtfulness, adjusting his work schedule to be present during my visits, ensuring Jake had time with both of us together to normalize our co-parenting dynamic, never overstepping boundaries or pressuring for more than our carefully structured arrangement. By the 5th week, Jake had adjusted remarkably well to having both biological parents in his life. He called me mommy now, with casual ease, differentiated from his foster mother whom he still remembered as Mama Lynn. He delighted in having both Grant and me at bedtime, developed small rituals that incorporated both of us, and showed no signs of the confusion or distress the social workers had warned might occur. "He's thriving," Dr. Winters observed during our follow-up consultation. "The consistency you've both maintained, the united messaging about your family structure, the gradual transition, it's textbook successful co-parenting." "He seems to have accepted the situation with remarkable ease," Grant noted, pride evident in his voice. "Children his age are naturally adaptable, but Jake is particularly resilient," Dr. Winters agreed. "Having both biological parents actively involved, working cooperatively rather than competitively, provides tremendous security. I think we can move forward with the next phase of the transition plan, as scheduled." The next phase involved Jake's first overnight at my apartment, a significant milestone in our gradually evolving custody arrangement. I had spent weeks preparing, transforming my second bedroom from a study space into a child's room, complete with dinosaur decals on the walls and a small bed with star-patterned sheets. "Are you nervous?" Tara asked, helping me arrange Jake's favorite stuffed animals the morning before his scheduled arrival. "Terrified," I admitted. It's one thing to participate in his routine at Grant's place, with all the resources and support that environment offers. It's another to have sole responsibility here, even just for one night. "You're more than ready for this," she assured me. "You've been preparing for this moment for 2 years, Rachel. What if something goes wrong? What if he gets sick or has a nightmare? What if he hates it here and wants to go back to Grant's? Then you handle it, just like any parent does." Tara's practicality was grounding. "You call Grant if you need to, you comfort Jake if he's upset, you adapt to whatever arises. That's parenting." She was right, of course. Yet the significance of this step, this tangible evidence of my legal and practical reintegration into Jake's life, filled me with both exhilaration and terror. When Grant arrived with Jake that afternoon, our son raced into the apartment with excited curiosity, dragging his small backpack behind him. "Where's my room, Mommy? Can I see it now? Did you get the special nightlight like at Daddy's house?" His enthusiasm eased my anxiety somewhat. Grant followed more slowly, carrying an additional bag of supplies and watching Jake's exploration with careful attention. "Everything looks great, Rachel," he said, glancing around my modest apartment. "You've made it very welcoming for him." I tried. I gestured toward Jake's room. "It's not as elaborate as his space at your place, but—" "It's perfect," Grant interrupted gently. "It's warm and personal, and clearly created with love. That's what matters." The simple validation calmed my remaining nerves. As we settled into the afternoon routine, snacks at my small kitchen table, playing with the new toys I'd carefully selected for this space, a walk to the neighborhood playground, the momentousness of the occasion gradually gave way to ordinary domesticity. When evening arrived and Grant prepared to leave, I braced myself for potential tears or protest from Jake. Instead, he hugged his father casually, said, "See you tomorrow, Daddy," and returned immediately to the puzzle we'd been working on together. Grant raised an eyebrow, amused. "Well, I guess I shouldn't be offended by how easily he's handling my departure." "It's a good sign," I said, walking him to the door. "It means he feels secure with both of us." At the threshold, Grant hesitated. "Call me if you need anything. Anytime, day or night." "We'll be fine," I assured him, more confident now after seeing Jake's comfortable adjustment. "But I will if we need you." "I know you will." His smile held more than professional co-parenting courtesy. "You've never been afraid to handle things independently. It's one of the qualities I've always admired about you." The casual compliment, delivered with such sincerity, caught me off guard. Before I could formulate a response, he continued, "The court review is next week, 6 months since the reinstatement order." His expression grew more serious. "Based on how well the transition has gone, I've instructed Margaret to recommend increasing your physical custody time, if you feel ready for that." The offer of additional time with Jake, beyond what the court had initially ordered, momentarily stunned me. "Are you sure?" "The current arrangement is working well, and the judge only required review, not necessarily changes." "I'm sure." Grant's gaze was direct, unflinching. "You've more than proven yourself, Rachel. Jake adores you, thrives in your care. He deserves as much time with his mother as our schedules can reasonably accommodate." The acknowledgement, his recognition of my place in Jake's life, his willingness to share custody more generously than required, touched me deeply. Thank you. That means more than I can express. You don't need to thank me. It's simply what's right for Jake. He glanced back toward where our son played contentedly. Enjoy your evening. I'll pick him up tomorrow after lunch, as planned. As I closed the door behind him, I was struck by how dramatically my life had transformed in the months since that fateful day at social services. From supervised visits with no legal rights to hosting my first overnight with my son. From the shame of surrender to the pride of proven redemption. From viewing Grant as the villain in my personal narrative to recognizing the thoughtful, committed father and co-parent he had become. The evening unfolded with surprising smoothness. Dinner at my small table, bath time in my modest bathroom. The bedtime story routine we practiced at Grant's place now transferred to this new environment. When Jake fell asleep, his small hand clutching mine as I sat beside his new bed, the fullness in my heart was almost painful in its intensity. I had dreamed of this moment through the darkest days of early recovery, through countless 12-step meetings and therapy sessions, through the supervised visits that both sustained and tormented me. My son, asleep under my roof, legally and practically recognized as my child once again. The journey wasn't complete. The co-parenting relationship with Grant still required careful navigation. My recovery remained a daily commitment. The balance between motherhood and my nursing education demanded constant attention. But in this quiet moment, watching Jake's peaceful breathing, I allowed myself to fully recognize how far I'd come. And how unexpectedly grateful I was to be sharing this journey with the one person I'd once believed had destroyed my life. The 6-month court review proceeded exactly as Grant had predicted. Judge Walters, reviewing our documentation of successful co-parenting and Jake's positive adjustment, approved the modified custody agreement we jointly proposed, increasing my physical custody to include regular overnights and weekends, while maintaining Grant's primary residence as Jake's home base. The court is pleased to see such productive co-parenting, Judge Walters noted, her typically stern expression softening slightly. It's evident that both parents are prioritizing the child's needs above personal considerations. The graduated transition plan has been implemented with admirable consistency and attention to developmental appropriateness. As we left the courthouse, the autumn sunshine warm on our faces, Grant suggested lunch to celebrate the successful hearing. Over sandwiches at a nearby cafe, he broached a subject I hadn't expected. The semester ends next month, right? For your nursing prerequisites? I nodded, surprised he had tracked this detail of my life. Final exams are in 3 weeks. Then I apply for the RN program, assuming my grades are high enough. They will be. His confidence in my academic abilities was unexpected but welcome. I've been thinking about your schedule once you start the nursing program. The demands will be significant: clinical rotations, intensive coursework, study time. I'm aware, I said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into my voice. I've planned for it. My custody time with Jake won't be affected. I know that. Grant's expression was thoughtful rather than critical. But it will be challenging to maintain your current housing situation while attending school full-time and working enough hours to support yourself. The commute alone between your apartment, the campus, the hospital, and my place for custody exchanges adds significant stress. I set down my sandwich, suddenly wary. What are you suggesting? There's a townhouse in my building. 3 bedrooms, separate entrance, completely independent living space. It becomes available next month. He met my gaze directly. I'd like to offer it to you. Grant, before you refuse, he continued quickly, please hear me out. This isn't charity or an attempt to control your living situation. It's a practical solution that benefits all of us, especially Jake. I crossed my arms, skeptical but willing to listen. Go on. The townhouse would provide more space for you and Jake during his overnight stays. It would eliminate the commute time for custody exchanges, giving you more actual time with him rather than travel time. The building has security and amenities that would simplify your life while you're focusing on your education. He ticked off these points with his usual methodical precision. Most importantly, it would allow Jake to move seamlessly between his parents without significant disruption to his routine. The proposal made practical sense, which made it harder to dismiss outright. And what would this cost? Nothing. Grant, I can't accept. The space is mine, he explained. Part of my investment in the building, It's currently unoccupied and will remain so whether you use it or not. I'm not losing rental income or incurring additional expense by making it available to you." I studied his expression, searching for ulterior motives. And what would be expected in return for this arrangement? Nothing beyond what we're already doing, co-parenting Jake effectively, maintaining clear communication, working together for his well-being. His gaze held mine steadily. "This isn't a transaction, Rachel. It's an offer of practical support during a challenging phase of your education, with the added benefit of simplifying Jake's transitions between us." The proposal tempted me more than I wanted to admit. My current apartment, while adequate for my needs alone, felt cramped when Jake visited. The commute between various points in my life consumed valuable time and energy. The prospect of nursing school while balancing motherhood and part-time work already seemed daunting. "I need to maintain my independence," I said finally. "Financially, practically, emotionally. I understand that. It's part of what makes you such a strong mother for Jake." Grant leaned forward slightly. "The townhouse would be your space entirely. Your furniture, your rules, your life. Just in closer proximity to Jake's primary residence, with practical advantages for all of us." "I'll think about it," I conceded. "But I need to discuss it with my sponsor, think through all the implications." Of course. His immediate acceptance of this boundary was another small indication of how much he had changed. The Grant I'd known 5 years ago would have pressed for immediate decision, strategized to overcome objections, persisted until he got his way. This Grant respected my need for space and consideration, my reliance on my recovery support system. "Thank you for understanding," I said, genuinely appreciative of his patience. "Take all the time you need." He signaled for the check with his usual efficiency. "Whatever you decide, we'll make our current arrangement work." As we parted ways outside the restaurant, Grant heading back to his office, me to my afternoon class, I found myself contemplating how our relationship had evolved over these months of co-parenting. The initial antagonism had gradually given way to mutual respect, then to a tentative friendship based on shared goals for Jake's well-being. But beneath that functional partnership ran an undercurrent of something more complicated, moments of connection that transcended practical co-parenting, glimpses of the rapport we'd once shared, an awareness that neither of us acknowledged directly, but both increasingly felt. Living in such close proximity would inevitably intensify that undercurrent. Was I ready for the emotional complications that might arise? Could I maintain appropriate boundaries while accepting this practical support? Most importantly, what arrangement truly served Jake's best interests? These were the questions I took to my meeting with Brian that evening, seeking the objective perspective of someone who understood both my recovery journey and the importance of healthy relationships in maintaining sobriety. "It's a reasonable offer from a practical standpoint," Brian observed after I outlined Grant's proposal. "The question is whether you can accept this support without compromising your independence or creating unhealthy dependency." "Exactly, and whether living so close to Grant might complicate things." Brian's knowing look cut straight to the heart of my unspoken concern. "You mean whether it might lead to rekindling your romantic relationship?" Heat rose to my cheeks at his directness. "That's not on the table. We're focused on co-parenting Jake effectively." His skepticism was evident. "And there are absolutely no unresolved feelings between you?" I hesitated, the commitment to rigorous honesty ingrained through 2 years of recovery making it impossible to maintain the pretense. "It's complicated. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago. He's changed in ways I never expected. I've changed too. The question isn't whether feelings exist," Brian said gently. "It's whether acting on those feelings would support or potentially threaten your recovery and your co-parenting relationship. That's what worries me. If things became romantic again and then fell apart, Jake would be caught in the middle. We'd lose the effective co-parenting dynamic we've worked so hard to establish." "A legitimate concern," Brian nodded thoughtfully. "But refusing practical support that benefits your son out of fear of emotional complications doesn't necessarily serve him either. So what do I do? You set clear boundaries, with Grant and with yourself. You maintain your support system and recovery practices. You remain vigilant about your emotional health." He smiled slightly. "And you accept that life is rarely neat and tidy. Sometimes the messy, complicated path is the one that leads to growth." I considered his advice, weighing the practical benefits against the emotional risks. If I accept, I'd want it to be temporary, just until I complete nursing school. and I'd insist on contributing something toward expenses, even if it's below market rate. Those sound like reasonable parameters. Brian's approval was reassuring. The key is maintaining your agency in this situation. Accepting support isn't the same as surrendering independence, as long as the terms are mutually agreed upon rather than imposed. By the time I left our meeting, my decision was tentatively formed. After discussing the situation with Tara, who enthusiastically endorsed the practical advantages while warning me to keep my heart guarded, I contacted Grant to discuss potential terms for accepting his offer. To my surprise, he readily agreed to all my conditions: a formal lease agreement with nominal rent, clearly defined expectations regarding personal space and boundaries, and the understanding that the arrangement would be reevaluated once I completed nursing school. His willingness to accommodate my need for clearly defined parameters further convinced me this wasn't an attempt to control or manipulate, but genuinely offered support. 3 weeks later, after completing my final exams with better grades than I dared hope for, I moved into the townhouse unit on the second floor of Grant's building. The space was modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city park and an open floor plan that made even my modest furniture collection look stylish. Jake, of course, was thrilled by the arrangement. "Now I can see you both all the time," he exclaimed, racing between his room and my townhouse and the elevator that would take him up to Grant's penthouse. "We're like a real family, but with 2 houses." His simple assessment made me smile even as it highlighted the unusual nature of our situation. We were indeed functioning as a family unit in many ways, sharing information about Jake's development, coordinating activities and appointments, presenting a unified approach to parenting decisions, yet maintaining separate households and carefully defined boundaries. The arrangement proved even more practical than I'd anticipated. Jake transitioned seamlessly between his 2 homes, often running up to Grant's for breakfast before school and returning to my place for afternoon activities on my custody days. Grant and I developed an easy rhythm of communication, a co-parenting shorthand that required minimal effort to maintain. As the weeks passed, my initial anxiety about living in such close proximity gradually faded. The boundaries we'd established remained clear and respected. Grant never appeared at my door unannounced, always texted before suggesting any deviation from our agreed schedule, and remained scrupulously professional in our interactions. Perhaps too professional, a small voice occasionally whispered when I caught him watching me with an expression that hinted at more than co-parenting consideration, or when our hands brushed during custody exchanges, creating that same unwelcome spark that had been increasingly difficult to ignore. But we both maintained the careful distance we'd tacitly agreed upon, focusing our energy and attention on Jake's well-being rather than the complicated emotions simmering beneath the surface of our interactions. Until the night everything changed. Jake's 4th birthday fell on a Saturday in early spring, 6 months after I'd moved into the townhouse. We had planned a joint celebration, a small party at the Children's Science Museum followed by cake and presents at Grant's penthouse, with friends from preschool and their parents invited to both events. The day had been perfect, Jake surrounded by friends, delighted by the dinosaur-themed activities we'd arranged, beaming with joy at being the center of attention. By the time the last guest departed and Jake had opened his many presents, he was happily exhausted, falling asleep on the living room sofa surrounded by new toys. "I'll take him to bed," Grant offered, lifting our sleeping son with practiced ease. "Would you mind cleaning up the wrapping paper while I get him settled?" I nodded, gathering the colorful debris of celebration, while reflecting on how far we'd come since Jake's last birthday, when he'd still been in foster care, Grant unaware of his existence, and me limited to a brief supervised visit with a small cupcake and modest gift. When Grant returned from Jake's room, he found me sitting on the sofa, a dinosaur plush toy in my lap and unexpected tears on my cheeks. "Rachel, what's wrong?" He sat beside me, concern evident in his voice. "Nothing's wrong." I wiped at my eyes, embarrassed by the emotional display. Just the opposite. I was thinking about last year, how different everything was then. How far we've all come. Understanding softened his expression. "It's been quite a journey." "It has." I stroked the soft plush dinosaur absently. "I never imagined we'd be here, co-parenting so effectively, giving Jake the security of having both his biological parents actively involved in his life. Sometimes, it still doesn't seem real. But it is real." Grant's voice was gentle. "You're legally and practically his mother again." He's thriving with both of us in his life. We've created something remarkable here, Rachel. We have, I agreed, looking up to meet his gaze directly. Thank you for making it possible. For supporting my petition to reinstate my rights, for being so generous with custody arrangements, for everything. You don't need to thank me. His expression grew more serious. I should be thanking you for allowing me into Jake's life, even after everything that happened between us. For your willingness to co-parent despite our difficult history. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside me. We've both changed, Grant, grown, learned from our mistakes. Yes, he agreed quietly. Though some mistakes I regret more deeply than others. I knew instantly what he was referencing, the cruel ending of our relationship, his prioritization of career over connection, the cascade of events that had followed. The past is past, I said softly. We can't change it. We can only move forward. Move forward, he repeated thoughtfully. That's what we've been doing, isn't it? Building something new from the ashes of what we destroyed. The poetic turn of phrase surprised me coming from someone typically so practical, so focused on concrete reality rather than emotional nuance. I've been thinking a lot lately, Grant continued, his voice taking on an unusual hesitancy. About us, about what we've built together for Jake, about possibilities I've been too cautious to explore. My pulse quickened. Grant. Please, he interrupted gently. Let me say this while I have the courage. These past months of working with you, seeing you with Jake, witnessing your strength and determination, they've awakened feelings I thought were long buried. Feelings I have no right to express, given our history, but that I can't seem to suppress any longer. The raw honesty in his admission left me momentarily speechless. This vulnerability, this emotional openness, was so fundamentally different from the calculated ambition that had defined him when we were together before. We agreed to focus on co-parenting. I finally managed, the safe response that maintained the careful boundaries we'd established, on giving Jake stability. And we've done that. Successfully. Grant's gaze held mine steadily. But is it wrong to wonder if we could be more than just co-parents? If there might be something worth rebuilding between us as well? The question I'd been carefully avoiding for months now lay exposed between us, impossible to ignore or deflect. The truth was that my own feelings had evolved as well, respect gradually deepening into admiration, cautious cooperation into genuine connection, old wounds healing enough to allow new possibilities to emerge. I don't know. I answered honestly. There's so much at stake now. Jake, our co-parenting relationship, my recovery, your business. If we tried again and it didn't work. I understand the risks. Grant reached for my hand, his touch gentle but intentional. I'm not asking for commitments or declarations, just openness to the possibility. Permission to explore what might be there between us now, as the people we've become rather than the people we were. His request was reasonable, measured, and terrifying in its implications. Opening myself to romantic possibility with Grant again meant vulnerability, risk, the potential for heartbreak. Yet, continuing to suppress the growing connection between us created its own kind of strain, a pretense that required increasing effort to maintain. What would this look like practically? I asked, default pragmatism providing safe ground amid emotional uncertainty. We have Jake to consider, our living arrangement, our established boundaries. We take it slowly, very slowly. Grant's thumb traced circles on my palm, the simple touch sending shivers up my arm. We're honest with each other about expectations and fears. We continue prioritizing Jake's well-being above our personal relationship. And most importantly, we commit to maintaining our effective co-parenting, regardless of what happens romantically. The thoughtfulness of his approach, so different from the impulsive passion that had characterized our first relationship, spoke volumes about his personal growth. The Grant I'd known before would have pursued what he wanted with single-minded determination, focused on the goal rather than the process. This Grant recognized the complexity, the need for caution, the priority of our shared responsibility to Jake. I need time to think, I said finally. This isn't a decision I can make impulsively. Of course. He released my hand immediately, respecting my need for space. Take all the time you need. There's no pressure, no timeline. I just wanted you to know where I stand. The absence of pressure, the willingness to wait for my careful consideration, further highlighted how profoundly he had changed. Or perhaps, simply revealed aspects of his character that had always existed beneath the ambitious exterior, now given room to emerge through the transformative experience of fatherhood. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, rising from the sofa, "and for understanding the need for caution." As I gathered my things to return to my townhouse, Grant walked me to the elevator with appropriate distance maintained between us. The conversation had shifted something fundamental in our dynamic, yet his behavior remained respectful of established boundaries. "Good night, Rachel," he said simply as the elevator doors opened. "I'll bring Jake down for breakfast at 9, as planned." "Good night, Grant." In the privacy of the descending elevator, I leaned against the wall, processing the implications of what had just transpired. Grant Mitchell, the man whose rejection had once sent me spiraling into self-destruction, had expressed feelings for me again. Not with grand declarations or impulsive passion, but with thoughtful consideration of all that now connected and complicated our relationship. And I, despite years of protective barriers and careful emotional management, found myself genuinely considering the possibility. Not out of lingering attachment to the past or desperation for connection, but based on appreciation for the man he had become, the partnership we had built, the potential for something deeper and more meaningful than what we'd shared before. The next morning, as promised, Grant brought a still pajama-clad Jake to my townhouse for birthday pancakes. Their arrival was preceded by a polite text, the established protocol maintained despite the previous evening's revelations. Throughout breakfast, Grant remained his usual self, attentive to Jake, respectful of my space, neither pushing for response to his confession nor pretending it hadn't happened. Watching him with our son, patient as Jake insisted on adding chocolate chips to his pancakes in the shape of a dinosaur, genuinely engaged in conversation about which new toy was the favorite, consistently kind and present, I found myself wondering if the man I'd fallen in love with years ago had always contained the potential for this version of himself. If perhaps we both needed to grow separately before we could possibly work together. Over the following weeks we maintained our established co-parenting routine, while I considered Grant's proposition. I discussed it extensively with Brian and Tara, examining my motivations, assessing potential risks to my recovery and to Jake's stability, questioning whether my feelings were based in present reality or past attachment. The key question, Brian suggested during one of our meetings, isn't whether you still have feelings for Grant. It's whether exploring those feelings serves your overall well-being and recovery, or potentially threatens it. "And what do you think?" I asked, genuinely valuing his perspective. "I think you're in a fundamentally different place than you were 5 years ago. More grounded, more aware of your own worth independent of external validation, more capable of maintaining healthy boundaries." He smiled slightly. "And from what you've described, Grant has undergone significant transformation as well." "He has." I agreed. The arrogance, the single-minded ambition, the emotional detachment, they've been replaced by genuine humility, by commitment to values beyond professional success, by openness I never saw when we were together before. "People can change," Brian reminded me. "You're living proof of that possibility. The question is whether you're willing to risk discovering the extent of his transformation." The decision crystallized gradually, not in a single moment of clarity, but through accumulation of small realizations. Watching Grant adjust his entire life around Jake's needs without complaint or resentment, observing his consistent respect for my boundaries and independence, recognizing the patience with which he awaited my response to his emotional disclosure, neither pressuring nor withdrawing. Most importantly, acknowledging my own evolution, from someone whose self-worth had been devastatingly tied to Grant's approval to a woman who had rebuilt her life, regained custody of her son, and established professional direction entirely independent of any relationship. 3 weeks after Jake's birthday, I invited Grant to dinner at my townhouse after Jake was asleep. The invitation itself communicated my readiness to discuss what had been left unresolved between us. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began once we were settled at my small dining table. "The pasta, I'd prepared a reminder of how far I'd come from the days when cooking had been beyond my capabilities. About exploring possibilities beyond co-parenting." Grant nodded, his expression carefully neutral, and, "I'm open to the possibility," I said simply, "with conditions." Relief flashed across his features before composure returned. I expected nothing less. "What conditions?" "We go very slowly. No rushing into physical intimacy or relationship labels." I met his gaze directly. We maintain absolute transparency about what we're feeling and thinking. No assumptions, no guesswork. Agreed. We don't tell Jake anything until we're certain this is stable and lasting. No confusing him with relationship changes that might not be permanent. Absolutely. Grant's immediate agreement was reassuring. His stability comes first, always. And most importantly, I continued, reaching the most crucial boundary. We commit to preserving our effective co-parenting, regardless of what happens romantically between us. If this doesn't work out, we find a way to continue working together for Jake's sake, without bitterness or recrimination. Grant considered these terms with characteristic thoughtfulness. Those are all reasonable and necessary conditions. I agree to all of them. He hesitated, then added, I have one condition of my own, if that's acceptable. Which is that we approach this as something new, not as a continuation of our previous relationship. We've both changed too much for that to be productive. His expression was earnest, unexpectedly vulnerable. I want to discover who you are now, Rachel, not try to recapture who we were 5 years ago. The perception in his request touched me deeply. I'd like that too. And so began what Jake would later call our friendship dating, careful, intentional exploration of connection beyond co-parenting. We started with occasional dinners after Jake was asleep, conversations that delved deeper than practical child-rearing matters into personal hopes, fears, values, and dreams. We gradually added daytime activities without Jake, coffee between my classes, walks in the park during my lunch break, quiet moments of connection carved from busy schedules. Through these interactions, I discovered aspects of Grant I'd never fully appreciated during our first relationship: his dry sense of humor, his genuine intellectual curiosity, his capacity for self-reflection, his surprising artistic sensibility evident in how he engaged with music and literature. He, in turn, expressed wonder at the strength, resilience, and compassion that recovery had cultivated in me. You've always been extraordinary, he told me during one evening walk along the riverfront. But now there's a depth to you, a groundedness that's truly remarkable. You know who you are, in a way few people ever achieve. The compliment, so different from the physical appreciation or status-based validation that had characterized his attention in our previous relationship, warmed something deep inside me. This was being seen for who I truly was, not for what I represented or provided. Physical intimacy developed gradually, with deliberate restraint that built anticipation rather than frustrating it. The first time Grant kissed me, after nearly a month of friendship dating, it felt both familiar and entirely new, comfort and excitement perfectly balanced. When we eventually became intimate again, 3 months into this careful exploration, the experience transcended physical pleasure into profound connection. This is different, Grant murmured afterward, his fingers tracing patterns along my spine as we lay in the darkness of my bedroom. Deeper somehow, more real. Because we're different, I agreed, understanding exactly what he meant. More honest with ourselves and each other. Less performance, more authenticity. Throughout this gradual deepening of romantic connection, we maintained our commitment to prioritizing Jake's stability. In his presence, we remained the same effective co-parents we'd been for months, neither displaying romantic affection nor creating confusion about our evolving relationship. The boundaries between our parental responsibilities and personal connection remained clear and respected. 6 months after that first tentative agreement to explore possibilities, we had our final court review with Judge Walters. With Jake now thriving in the care of both his biological parents, the graduated custody schedule having proven successful, and all conditions of the reinstatement order fulfilled, the court removed the remaining supervision requirements and established a permanent joint custody arrangement. The court commends both parents on their exemplary co-parenting and commitment to their child's well-being, Judge Walters noted, a rare smile softening her typically stern demeanor. This case will serve as a model for successful reintegration of a parent following termination of rights. As we left the courthouse for the final time, legal proceedings finally complete after nearly 18 months of hearings, reviews, and supervised transitions, Grant reached for my hand in a rare public display of our now established relationship. We did it, he said simply. We created something remarkable here, Rachel. Not just for Jake, but for ourselves. We did, I agreed, squeezing his fingers gently. Something I never thought possible when I saw you in that social services office. That evening, After celebrating the successful court outcome with a small family dinner, we sat Jake down for another carefully planned conversation. At 4.5, he was old enough now to understand more complex family dynamics. Though we still kept explanations age-appropriate and straightforward. "Jake," Grant began, sitting beside me on the sofa with our son between us, "you know how Mommy and I both love you very much, right?" Jake nodded, more interested in his new action figure than the conversation. "Yup, you're my biological parents." The casual use of terminology we'd carefully introduced made us both smile. "That's right," I confirmed. "And for a long time now, Daddy and I have been friends who work together to take care of you." "Best friends," Jake corrected, still focused on his toy. "That's what you always say." "Well, sometimes friends can become something more," Grant continued carefully. "Sometimes friends can start to love each other in a special way, like in the stories we read about families." This caught Jake's attention. He looked up, studying our faces with sudden interest. "Like Tommy's mom and new dad? They were friends, and then they got married." "Similar to that, yes," I said, impressed by his quick understanding. "Daddy and I have realized that we care about each other in a special way, beyond just being your parents together." Jake considered this information with his usual serious concentration. "So, are you boyfriend and girlfriend now?" The simple question made us both laugh, tension releasing. "Something like that," Grant acknowledged. "We care about each other very much, and we wanted you to know that things might be a little different now. We might spend more time all together as a family, not just during custody exchanges." "Are you going to live in the same house?" Jake asked, his practical concerns immediately apparent. "Will I still have 2 bedrooms?" "Nothing is changing right now with our living arrangements," I assured him, grateful for Grant's willingness to proceed slowly with this aspect as well. "You'll still have your room at Daddy's and your room at my place. We're just letting you know that Daddy and I care about each other in a special way, and you might see us hugging or holding hands sometimes." "Okay," Jake shrugged, returning his attention to his action figure with a matter-of-fact acceptance that continued to amaze me. "Can we have ice cream now? You promised after dinner." And just like that, the momentous conversation was complete, processed, and integrated with remarkable ease into Jake's understanding of his family structure. As we moved to the kitchen for the promised dessert, Grant's arm slipped around my waist in a gesture that no longer needed to be hidden or explained. "Well, that was anticlimactic," he murmured with amusement. "Children adapt," I reminded him, especially when changes are presented as positive developments rather than disruptions. Later, after Jake was asleep, we sat on Grant's balcony overlooking the city lights, glasses of sparkling cider celebrating both the court outcome and Jake's easy acceptance of our relationship. "What happens now?" I asked, contemplating the cityscape rather than meeting his gaze directly. "We've reached all the legal milestones. Jake knows about us. Life will start settling into a more permanent pattern. Now we continue building," Grant said simply. "One day at a time, as you would say." The casual reference to recovery language made me smile. "You've been paying attention to everything about you." His expression grew more serious as he turned to face me directly. "Rachel, these past months have been the most meaningful of my life. Becoming Jake's father, building this co-parenting relationship with you, discovering who we can be together now, it's changed everything I thought I understood about success and fulfillment." The sincerity in his voice touched me deeply. "For me too. Finding my way back to Jake, to a version of myself I can be proud of, to a connection with you I never thought possible after everything that happened, it's been extraordinary. I don't want it to end," Grant said quietly. "This journey we're on together. I want to keep discovering who we can be as a family, as partners, as individuals growing alongside each other." The implication was clear, though he stopped short of formal proposals or declarations. We were moving toward permanence, toward commitment beyond co-parenting, toward a future together that neither of us could have imagined when we encountered each other at social services 18 months ago. "I want that too," I admitted, allowing myself to fully embrace the possibility, to keep building this new reality we've created together. Grant's smile, genuine, unguarded, filled with hope and tenderness, reflected my own cautious optimism. "One day at a time?" "One day at a time," I agreed, leaning into his embrace as we contemplated the city lights and the unexpected journey that had brought us to this moment of possibility. Epilogue. 1 year later. "Mom, Dad, look at me." Jake called from the playground structure, hanging upside down with characteristic fearlessness. At 5.5, he was thriving in kindergarten, his natural intelligence and curiosity fostered by two parents who delighted in his development. "I see you, buddy," Grant called back, his arm comfortably around my shoulders as we watched from a nearby bench. "Be careful with your landings." I leaned into Grant's embrace, enjoying the spring sunshine and the simple pleasure of family time. So much had changed in the year since our final court hearing, my graduation from nursing school, my new position in pediatric care at the city's leading children's hospital, our evolving family structure that now included shared living space in a house we purchased together near Jake's school. "Penny for your thoughts," Grant murmured, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Just reflecting on how far we've come," I said, watching Jake race toward the slide. 3 years ago, I was counting days of sobriety and wondering if I'd ever be more than a visitor in Jake's life. Now I'm a registered nurse, legally, and practically his mother in every sense, and building a life I never dared imagine. With a devastatingly handsome partner, Grant added with the hint of playful ego that always made me smile. "Don't push your luck," I teased, but leaned up to kiss him lightly. "Though I suppose you're not entirely unpleasant to have around." High praise indeed. His expression grew more serious. "I was thinking about something similar, actually. About cosmic coincidences and second chances." "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, I was a successful CEO by every external measure, but emotionally empty, chasing achievements that brought no real fulfillment. His gaze followed Jake, who was now organizing an elaborate game with other children on the playground. Then by some twist of fate or divine intervention, I walked into that social services office at exactly the right moment to find my son, and in the process, found my way back to the woman I never should have left. The simple sincerity in his statement touched me deeply. "We needed the time apart," I reminded him. "We weren't ready for each other then. We both had growing to do." "True." He squeezed my shoulders gently. "But I'm profoundly grateful that the universe gave us a second chance to get it right." "Me too." I rested my head against his shoulder, contentment washing through me, though I'm not sure I would have recognized it as a second chance that day in social services. It felt more like cosmic punishment at the time. "The universe works in mysterious ways," Grant said with mock solemnity that made me laugh. "Dad, Mom, come play with us," Jake called, waving us toward the elaborate game he'd organized with his playground companions. As we rose to join our son, hand in hand with the easy comfort of established partnership, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. From the depths of addiction to the heights of recovery. From the pain of surrendering my child to the joy of legal and emotional reunion. From bitter exes to tentative co-parents to devoted partners building a future together. Life rarely follows the paths we expect or plan. Sometimes its greatest gifts arrive disguised as its cruelest jokes, like a billionaire CEO unwittingly adopting his own biological child, and in the process rediscovering the woman who had never quite left his heart. Sometimes second chances emerge from our greatest mistakes, redemption rises from our darkest moments, and love rebuilds itself from ashes we thought would never cool. As Jake raced into my arms, his laughter bright in the spring sunshine, I silently thanked whatever cosmic force had orchestrated this impossible reunion, this family forged through pain and perseverance, this love tempered by loss and recommitment, this second chance neither of us had sought but both had ultimately embraced. Some might call it fate. Others, divine intervention. I simply called it grace, unearned, unexpected, and infinitely precious. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share with someone who might need a reminder that second chances are possible, that redemption can emerge from our darkest moments, and that sometimes life's most painful detours lead us exactly where we need to be. Tell me in the comments, do you believe in cosmic coincidences and second chances? I'd love to